Hey everyone, Param, host of the Personal Process Podcast. So just wanted to give a quick disclosure. We went deep for like 3, 4 hours with Dan. Amazing episode. And just wanted to give a quick notice because there were some, topics that some people may not want to hear right now. And it has a topic of death and specifically suicide. So if this is something that would trigger you, I just wanted to give an upfront notice so you have the decision to move forward with this episode or not. Beyond that, this episode did contain a lot of swearing. I did my absolute best to cut out the swear words and replace it with the word Zoom just to make it a little fun, but I probably didn't get to all of them. So just a heads up on that front. And with regards to certain names or company names used, I replaced that with the word loop to make it fun again. And also, I felt like it probably wasn't the best thing to put on the internet. And that's what we agreed on with Dan. So, with that said, still an amazing episode. Lots of value from global affairs to politics to Bitcoin and how he ran for the presidential election race in 2016 in the United States of America. Welcome to the Personal Process Podcast.
Podcasting worldwide from Vancouver, Canada. Welcome back to the Personal Process Podcast, the show that takes you through the growth, hardship, self-discovery, lessons, and stories of individuals who achieved success in their own personal path. Trust the process.
Welcome back to another episode of the Personal Process Podcast. Today's episode, we have Dan Marshall, Bitcoin advocate, and believe it or not, he was actually running in 2016 for the president. That is really, really cool. And, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I've always been interested in Bitcoin. I learned a little bit about it, crypto mining and all that kind of jazz, but I'm definitely a rookie when it comes to that. And I'm glad to have an expert like Dan here. So with that said, Dan, how are you doing? And is there any other points that I missed that you'd like to touch up on before we get into it?
Oh man, no, I'm great. First of all, thank you, Parm, for having me on the show, and
Absolutely.
I'm glad I saw your post on the Bitcoin subreddit. I guess I'm a lot of different things. First of all, I want to just clarify. I don't consider myself a Bitcoin expert. I've been in the space for about 7 years. I'm a huge tech nerd, right? Like I'm a technical consultant. I've been a nerd my entire life. I I had never done anything with investing or really finances or anything beyond like just a 401k until I got into Bitcoin 7 years ago. So like, I don't know. I try really hard to set the expectation that like I'm not an expert, but I've definitely followed the space for a while. And I know a bit about, I come from like a cybersecurity background. So like I have a keen interest in, OPSEC. So like making sure that your hardware wallet and your Bitcoin setup is secure. And then I also, my last job before my current position, I worked for a cybersecurity company that dealt with email phishing. So I'm also really
Wow.
interested in following scams in the space because I find them personally fascinating. I've always been interested in information security and hacking, and from like a blue team perspective, from a how do we stop this, not a how do I do this necessarily. Um, and so, it's weird to kind of see those worlds collide too, right? Because with Bitcoin, you've got this like new technology that a lot of people
Yep.
don't understand. Even like, I mean, I don't even fully understand it. I'm a huge nerd, and then you've also got it's like really unregulated right now, right? So it's like a bad combination because it's like something that a lot of people don't understand and something that there aren't a lot of rules around. It draws a lot of
Mm.
scammers. And so because of that, I keep my eye out for scams in the space so that I can maybe help people not lose their money. But then beyond all that, I mean, so like you mentioned, I'm a Bitcoin nerd. I'm a technical consultant at my day job. I'm
Right.
also a musician. I've been a musician for most of my life, mainly a singer, but I do play guitar and a little bit of piano. And then I'm also an author. I wrote a novel about 7 years ago, a science fiction cyberpunk dystopia novel. It's called The
Wow.
White Cap.
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
also wrote I wrote a second book. It's sort of a strange project. It's like I call it like my I put nonfiction in quotes. It's not to, I hope I don't offend anybody by saying that, but I made an updated version of the Jefferson Bible, which I don't know if you're
Wow.
familiar with the Jefferson Bible or not.
Not too much. Do you mind letting us know a little bit what that's about?
Sure, yeah. A lot of people don't know about this. I learned about it after school. Like I never learned about it in school. It's one of those things that I learned about like extracurricularly.
Yeah.
So Thomas Jefferson, was a deist, right? Like, so I don't know if a lot of people know what deism is because it's not like super popular now. But I guess you could, and I'm not an expert. I'm not a theologian or anything. But it's my understanding that deism is basically sort of like God is the universe and like nature. It's sort of like naturalism,
Hmm.
right? Like Walt Whitman, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Similar schools of thought, anyway. Anyway, so Jefferson took the four gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and he removed what he called, I believe he called it like the Drek and the Dross. Basically, he went through the gospel story, and he removed all of the like, well, not all, he removed a lot of the like miraculous stories. He removed a lot of the like claims of divinity that
Mm.
were attributed to Jesus in the gospel, leaving what he believed to be like the distilled moral lessons of Jesus.
Hmm.
Really interesting read. I mean, honestly, I think that I would think that most people would benefit from reading it because I think that it paints a very different picture of Jesus than what a lot of people might have in their head.
Yeah.
However, he used the King James version of the Bible to do this. He actually did it in like four different languages. He used the King James version for the English. I think he did like the Latin Vulgate. He did like a French copy and then some other language. So I mean, Thomas Jefferson was a
Yeah.
very smart man. He spoke several languages. So what he did was, I mean, he literally cut and paste. Like he took a razor blade, right? That was like old school copy and paste,
Yeah.
cut and paste, and he cut out the parts of the Bible that he did not like, and he redid the four gospels. And
Yeah.
now the Jefferson Bible title is something that other people have given that work. I believe he titled it something like the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth or something like that.
Mm.
He did not want it published during his lifetime. I think he knew that it was, I mean, even at the time, I mean, even now it's controversial to like edit the Bible, right? But especially
Hmm.
in that time frame, I'm pretty sure there are some people that would have like burned him at the stake for that. And so it was published posthumously,
Yep.
but it's a very interesting read. And so anyway, I think I have it priced right now at like 99 cents on Amazon. If any of your readers are interested in that, I'll double
Yeah.
check it. And if it's, I think the normal price point is like $3. I did it as more of a personal project. It's not really like I
Right.
have a day job, like I'm not
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not an author to like pay my bills. I'm an author because I had things that I wanted to
Interest.
say. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so
No, for sure. Dan, I should have asked you what aren't you interested in? What don't you do?
I mean, I'm not a big sports guy, so
Yeah.
which is weird because I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, which is
Yep.
a big Ohio State Buckeyes like college football. I,
Yep.
I now live about an hour north of Seattle, which, by the way, I heard in your intro that you're in Vancouver, so that's cool.
Neighbors.
I'm like 10 minutes south of the border, so once everything
Yep.
opens back up, man, we should get together for like some hot pot or something up in Vancouver.
Oh, 100%. Get some Thor or something going. Love it.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
Dan, you've done a lot. Author, cybersecurity, and we talked, off air about how Bitcoin became a story and how that kind of, I don't want to say changed your life because that might be a little bit too dramatic, but it played a big role. So, how about we get into that, and I want to take it all the way back because that's kind of how we do it over here.
Sure.
Tell me about childhood. Tell me about, the start, wherever you want to start with that.
Man, yeah. I mean, so, I was born in Columbus, Ohio. I was
Yep.
born in 1980. And so I like to phrase it. I mean, I personally think that, hundreds of years from now, that this will be called the information age. And
Mm-hmm.
I like to phrase it that I was born at sort of the burgeoning, I won't say the very beginning, right? Because I think you could trace the information age back a few decades before the 80s. But I
Sure.
think that I think that within my lifetime, like when I was born, there were almost no computers anywhere.
Yep.
And now there are computers everywhere
Everywhere.
in everything.
Yep.
Everything has a processor almost. My
Zoom.
toaster has a, sorry, I swear sometimes I will try not to.
That's okay.
My toaster has a microprocessor in it,
Yeah.
it's and so I feel really fortunate to have been born at a time when I was born, and not only to have been born at that time, but to have had the opportunities that I've had in my lifetime. Like, for instance, just one example. My dad bought an IBM PC AT in 1984. It was
Right.
a beast of a machine. Like, I was a 4-year-old kid, I couldn't even pick it up. It was so heavy. And I remember he paid like $4,000 for it,
Yep.
which, 1984 money, I don't even know what that is nowadays. With inflation,
Too
it's probably
much.
like 8 to 10 grand or something like that.
Maybe more.
Maybe, yeah, maybe more. But what was really cool about it is that even though he bought this like super expensive thing, he recognized like the potential for that to be like a learning thing for me, and he let me use it like unguarded. Like he wasn't sitting there
Right.
over my shoulder. I mean, I remember playing like Math Blaster. I remember messing around with like DOS, like learning DOS commands, just through trial and error, man.
Wow.
And so that was like my introduction to technology. I had really early access compared to my peer group, right? Most of my friends that are my same age anyway, most of my friends did not have a computer until the 90s in their home.
Yeah.
Some of them didn't even have access to it in school until the 90s, right? Because I grew up, when I was a little kid, I lived in Southern Ohio, which is like when we got that computer, I lived
Hmm.
in an area called Logan, Ohio, which if you want to look it up,
Logan.
I mean, it's a very like economically depressed area. There used to be a
Right.
lot of industry there, and like a lot of places in America, that industry has gone away over the decades, and there are a lot
Right.
of closed down factories. I remember I remember taking the bus to school, and we lived out in the country. And so it
Yeah.
was about an hour bus ride to school. And I remember driving by like literal shanties, just like
Wow.
lean-tos. Like there was like a rock face, I remember, that we would drive
Wow.
by, and there were just lean-tos against that. I mean, so like, I was not in this, right? Like my dad was retired. He was, I won't say well off, but like I never went hungry,
Yep.
but I grew up around the kind of poverty that people don't think really exists in America, and it does. And I do think, at the time, I don't think I really. I mean, well, I moved to Logan when I was like 6, 7 years old, so like
Yep.
you're just like a kid. You don't really think about that kind of stuff. It's not as present, maybe.
Yeah.
But I think that now that I'm an adult and I think back on that stuff, I mean, I do think that definitely had a real impact on me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I lived there until I was about 9 years old. And then at that point, about a month before my 10th birthday, my dad actually committed suicide. He shot
I'm sorry
himself
to
in the
hear.
head. No, thank you. I appreciate that. It was definitely he shot himself in the head, and then I came home from school and
Wow.
found him. So like it fucked up my
Zoom.
childhood, man. Like I would say that probably it took me. I mean, I'm sure that on some level, I'm probably still not over it, like fully over it. I don't know that you really ever, get over something like that. Like,
Yeah.
but I will say that it messed up my childhood for a while. Like I was a really angry kid. Well, I
Right.
mean, not even just angry. I mean, like honestly, just hurt. Like I was a really just hurting kid.
Yeah.
And I had to move at that point. Like my parents divorced when I was really young. And
Right.
so my dad had pretty much full-time custody of me. Prior to the age of 9, from about the age of like 2 to 9, I only saw my mom about every other weekend.
Right.
And so I went from seeing her twice a month to living with her full time. I was also just like a traumatized kid. So like it was a rough time, I think, for both of us. Like we struggled for a few years of like finding a cadence.
Yeah.
And it was weird too, because I moved, like my dad lived in Logan, Ohio.
Yep.
And so I lived there with him. And then when he died, I moved from Logan, Ohio to Dublin, Ohio. And I encourage anybody listening to this to look up both of those cities and compare the demographics. Dublin, Ohio, you may have heard of it because it's known for, I can't remember the name because, again, not a sports guy, but it's known for a very well known yearly golfing event that brings in like major money from all over the world. Dublin is a very affluent community, and we
Right.
didn't really have money, right? Like we lived in an apartment. I got made fun of because I wore like LA Gear shoes and I didn't have a starter jacket because that was what all the cool rich kids had. They had like
Yeah.
the Nike shoes and the
Yeah.
starter jacket and stuff like that. And like I didn't have any of that stuff. And so
Yeah.
it was a weird experience. Um, anyway, I mean, I moved around a lot as a kid. Like we lived in Dublin for a couple of years, and then my stepdad, his mom passed away and left him a house. And
Right.
so we ended up moving to a suburb of Columbus called Grandview Heights, where I ended up living for the rest of like high school and into adulthood. And then after that, man, once I moved out at 18, I lived. I mean, I've lived on almost every part of the city of Columbus, like every
Wow.
area except for like the South Side. So I know Columbus, Ohio, very well. Um, in 2008, I moved briefly. I was dating a gal that ended up going to Carnegie Mellon for grad school, and I moved to Pittsburgh with her.
Yep.
It didn't work out. We only ended up dating, I think, another like 3 or 4 months after that. So I didn't stay in Pittsburgh very long. Came back to Ohio around 2000, like the end of 2008.
Yep.
And then wasn't really, I don't know, it sort of felt like a defeat, right, to have left and then come back. And so I thought, I'm going to try somewhere else, man. I'm going to try living somewhere else. And so I moved down
Yeah.
to Sarasota, Florida. My parents have lived in that area for about the last 15 years. My cousin lives down there, and my cousin had a 2-bedroom with an open bedroom. And I thought, what the heck, I'll give it a shot.
There you
Hated
go.
Florida, man. Too hot, too hot, too many old people. I'm not like super conservative. I don't really jive with a lot of like conservative politics. And so
Fair enough.
I did not enjoy it there very much.
Fair enough.
And so I ended up moving to back to Ohio, where I lived for like another year.
Mhm.
And then I was dating a gal that she started getting some like back pain. And I mean, the short version of the story is it went from like, I have back pain, to a month and a half later, she was dead. And it turns out she
Wow.
had like stage 4 ovarian cancer. And it was caught too late.
That's tough.
And I basically had to just watch her die. I like held her hand as she took her last breath. It was a
Zoom.
tough way to start 2011. She died like a week into 2011. And so, so yeah, I found myself almost 10 years ago now, right? Like next month will be 10 years. I found myself in a spot where I was in a place where, yeah, I grew up there, but like I didn't have much tethering me there at that point, right?
Mhm.
My parents had moved to Florida a decade
Yep.
before that, almost a decade before that. My love died. I lost my job shortly after that because it's a long story, but like my performance suffered a little bit. And
Sure.
at a time where I could have used a little bit of compassion, my
Yep.
employer didn't, I guess, have any to spare. And so by April of that year, I found myself out of work. Had no real, there was nothing anchoring me to that place. And I had always
Right.
wanted to move to Portland. I visited Portland in the 90s when my sister and my brother both lived there at different times in the 90s. And I really liked it out there. I loved like the scenery and,
Yeah.
and so I thought, what the heck, man? Like if there's ever a time to up and move across the country, I think this is it. And so in May of 2011, I sold almost everything I owned. I packed
Wow.
up my car with I had my dog, my cat,
Yep.
a guitar amp,
Yep.
and 2 guitars and a banjo and a bag of clothes. And I was on the road 28 days. I took my time coming out here. I took like a kind of a circuitous path through the Southwest and then hit LA and came up the coast and stopped and stayed with mostly like family and friends along the way.
Yep.
I feel really fortunate. I mean, it's sort of a weird choice of words, I guess. Like the lead up to that was awful, right? Like,
Right.
but honestly, the last half of 2011 was probably one of the better years of my life. I was still in a lot of pain. I was still
Yep.
processing that loss, but like, man, what an opportunity. Like I got to see, I got to go through like Arizona. I had never been to the Southwest before. I got to see parts of this country that I had just never seen. And we
Yeah.
call them flyover states, but like honestly, there's a lot of beauty in this country and a lot of
There
good
is.
people. And so yeah, anyway, landed on the West Coast in 2011. A few years later, I ended up meeting my now wife, and she had grown
Congratulations.
up in the thanks. Yeah, so we started dating, and we had been dating like a year or so. When she moved in with me, we were renting a place in Portland, and we wanted to buy a house, but I feel weird saying this to you because I know you live in Vancouver, but I grew up in Ohio, man. So like when I
Yep.
see a house that's like more than 200,000 American, I'm thinking like that's a mansion, right? Like I mean,
Yep.
200 grand. I mean, like that's
Yep.
almost $250,000. Turns out though that 200 grand here it does not go very
It's
far,
nothing.
especially in Portland. And
Yep.
so she said, well, I'd like to move closer to where I grew up. She grew up in Bellingham, and I had
Right.
never even heard of it when we started dating. And so we came up here
Yep.
and visited, and I said, oh, this is great. I love it. Let's do it. And so 4 years
Lots of
ago, we
nature.
moved up here. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the short version of short. That's the
Yeah.
short-ish version of my life from beginning up till roughly now. So
Yeah.
now I live in Bellingham. I've spent the last 4 years here. I work from home, and so this is my home office. I actually have a 200 square foot detached home office that's behind my house. So we're about 20 feet behind my
Look
house
at
right
that.
now. And this is my home away from home. I'm out here at least 40 hours a week for work, and I come out here for
Wow.
my, my personal projects and my guitar playing and stuff as well. So
Yeah. That's fantastic, Dan. And just a couple of points I want to hit before we actually go into like how Bitcoin played a role in your life.
sure.
When you were moving, just from the instruments that you were mentioning, it seems like half of your luggage was instruments, if not more, and then half of it was your actual living belongings.
More than half. I mean, if you're talking about
man.
like actual volume taken up in the car,
Yeah.
right? Because like the guitar amp is like this big. The guitar cases are like this big.
Yeah.
My bag of clothes was literally a backpack. So like, yeah, it's probably a 3-to-1 ratio of like instrument volume to clothes volume.
Oh my God. You're a true musician when I love it. I love the dedication on that front. And Dan, one other point that I want to touch upon is because you went from living in an area that wasn't too well off to transitioning into an area that was well off. I know that you were a kid, but I want to ask you specifically, when you were a kid, did you notice any differences? And after, when you grew up and had some time to reflect, are there any lessons that you can take from the different groups of individuals and kind of, I guess, lessons that would help both sides?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I will say first of all, yeah, no, it's a great question. I think most great questions are tough questions. That it makes you think, right? That's a good thing. I think so. And again, like you mentioned, this is all through the lens of a child, right?
Mhm.
I will say that kids can be cruel, right? I was a little fat kid. I was a fat nerdy kid that wore glasses. So like I didn't have a lot of friends always. Like I've always been
Right.
an outgoing person. So I know a lot of people, but I
Right.
wouldn't necessarily say that I have a lot of friends because I don't really like a lot of people, really, if I'm being
Fair
honest.
enough. Acquaintances.
But I mean, I try. I do my best. I try to assume the best in people, and when people rub me
Sure.
the wrong way, I try to just imagine they're having a bad day. But I will admit I'm not always great at that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I will say that the kids that weren't as well off, it feels like that they were a little nicer. I mean, they had
Hmm.
their own struggles. I think might have been part of it, right? Like I went to school with kids that wore the same clothes because maybe they didn't have other clothes to wear, or
Right.
like kids that kids that might not have been eating at home, and the only meal that they got was at school.
Right.
And I think that when you're living in an existence like that, I think that it saps you of a lot of your energy. I don't think that you have.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe you
Mhm.
do have the desire, but I don't know that you have the ability to follow through and like being like super shitty to other people.
Yeah.
Contrast that with like the rich kids, right? And not everybody. I want to be clear. Like when I lived in Dublin, I had some really good friends. Like my friend Brian Turkelson, give him a shout out. We're still buddies
There
to
you
this
go.
day. He lives down in Florida. He's a great guy, and he grew up. I mean, his parents are pretty well off, So like, I want to be clear that I'm not, I'm kind of casting a broad net here, but I'm not
For
trying to
sure.
include every fish in this net,
For sure.
But
Just personal experience.
it feels like that the more affluent kids that like when you have everything handed to you, man, like you just don't appreciate stuff, and it makes you, I think in some people it makes you cruel because like
Hmm.
and I see it a lot in sort of affluent people now as an adult, right? This concept of like, well, I have this, or I was able to do this, so why can't you? And it's sort of
Right.
this like one size fits all approach that
Yeah.
it's just not realistic, man. It's just
Love that.
not how the world works. Like the world is very, in my experience, I found in my little over 40 years of life on this planet, that very little on this earth is straight black and white. Like almost everything is some shade of gray. And that's, you know, I guess if we're
Mhm.
speaking just generally, it feels like that the poor kids, while they could definitely be mean, I mean, I'm not going to say that I never got made fun
Sure.
of by a poor kid,
Sure.
right? Um, they had their own shit
Zoom.
that they were struggling with, I think,
Mhm.
more, and that took more precedence than like, how can I cut other people down?
Sure.
The rich kids, though, and that's not to say that it's not a struggle to be rich, because I mean, like, everybody has
Every
like their own different
There's
things. But
challenges and
I will say
demons.
that
Yeah.
like from about the age of 10, from about the age of 10 to 18, I was surrounded by people that like, I would say half of the kids that I went to high school with probably got a car just given to them on their 16th birthday. I
Yeah.
had to
Zoom.
mow lawns and like save up money,
Yeah.
and I worked at AMC theaters in the concession stand to like save up
Right.
money. I spent $2,000 on my first car. It was all my money.
What do you got?
I got a 1980 Toyota Cressida, actually. And man, that car was
Beauty.
badass. I mean, I bought it in 1996, so it was pretty old when I
Yeah.
bought it, but I bought it from the original owner, who was an
Yeah.
older lady. It only had 70,000 miles on it, and it had
Jeez.
power everything, man. It had a power sunroof, it had power windows, it had power seats, it had a freaking in dash factory CD player, which I cannot even imagine what that would have cost in 1980. That was probably a
Zoom.
$5,000 upgrade just for the
Jeez.
CD player alone. I loved that car. That thing was,
Yeah.
it was primo, light blue, amazing. And this
Beauty.
first Toyota of like 5 that I've owned in my life. So like, and even now I
Toyota
have a
makes good
Lexus,
cars.
so it's still basically a Toyota. So um,
No, I
yeah.
love it. So, that's an interesting kind of point that you made. I kind of wanted to kind of dive deeper on this front. You're mentioning that, when an individual is kind of going through a lot of hardships, they don't have time to really put others down. And I'm going to ask you a question and kind of get your thoughts on it. Do you think it's the fact that they don't have time, or do you think it's the fact that they've gone through these hardships and experienced different emotions? Because if you're rich, you don't really know the feeling of what it's like to be hungry. So when there's maybe a homeless person or something like that, you're kind of,
You have more empathy.
yeah, you're kind of apathetic and you don't really understand it. So do you think it's the fact that they just had more time to do this, or do you think it's kind of, just more
Maybe. I mean,
experience?
I think it depends on the person, right? Like, I think at the end of
Mhm.
the day, there are some people that are just can
Out
be
there.
mean, like,
Yeah.
and honestly, I find myself slipping into that sometimes, man. Like when it comes to like political stuff on the internet, I can be a complete ass, and I'm trying really hard to change that, because here's the thing. I think like I love sarcasm.
Yep.
I think that it's a valid way to make a point
Yep.
sometimes. I do think, and I'm speaking mostly about myself here, but I do think other people do this too. I think that I know, because I'm talking about myself, I know that I in the past have used sarcasm as a way to say things that I am apprehensive about saying directly, right? And I
Mm,
think that there's a danger there of using sarcasm as a crutch
mm,
to replace candor. And that's not who I want to be. Maybe there
right.
are people who want to be like that, and if that's how you want to operate, cool, man. Like I can't control what other people do, but I will
Yep.
say that for myself, I find that you know if your goal is to actually change people's minds, then you may want to rethink like being rude and condescending and sarcastic, and because it usually puts people on the defensive. And so like I don't know. I mean, anyway, kind of a roundabout answer to say I think it just depends on the person. I think there are some people that just innately are able to like, and I'm not going to say that I'm perfect about this, but I will say one thing that I think I'm decent at is I have empathy for people who are going through situations that I myself have not experienced. So I guess you could maybe call
Mm,
it sympathy rather than empathy, right? Because I haven't experienced it myself, but man, like I've been through some,
Zoom. You
like,
have.
and
Yep.
just because you're
Zoom.
going through isn't the same that I've
Zoom.
gone through, I feel solidarity for people that are struggling,
Yeah.
right? Like whether that's struggling with mental health, because I've been there
Yep.
myself. I
Yeah.
will say that I have some sort of maybe unique perspectives on suicide just because of what I've been through. Like I will
Yep.
never commit suicide. I don't care how bad
Yeah.
my life gets. Like I don't care if I'm sleeping on the streets. I have a keen interest in seeing, man, when I was a kid, I used to love to read sci-fi. I mean, I still read sci-fi. I
Right.
don't
Right.
read as much these days just because I'm so busy, but I would just chew through books. Like I would read a book a day when I was a kid,
Wow.
Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, just sort of like the classics.
Yeah.
I remember reading these books and thinking like, oh, this stuff sounds so cool, like going to other planets and like robots and all this stuff. And it all sounded so like far-fetched,
Yep.
and now here we are in 2020, and it's like you got Elon Musk talking
Space
about going to
asses.
Mars within the next 10 years. You've got Boston Dynamics releasing videos of robots doing
Zoom.
backflips. Like we are on the cusp of like so many changes in our society.
Yeah.
I want to be here for as much of that as I can be. I want to witness it. I want to be a part of it as much as I can be.
Right.
Even if that does just end up meaning that I'm like on the sidelines watching, okay, cool. I mean, even if I'm on the sidelines watching as humanity expands to other planets and
Yep.
like and starts to build like functioning robots, that I believe that the next step, once we have functioning robotics, I think the next step is the merging of biology and machine. Like you have like Neuralink, I think is like an
Yep.
early step towards that. I mean, just the advances that we've seen within prosthetics, just within my lifetime, it's
Oh yeah.
clear that we're already, those paths are converging, right? And so even if I'm
Absolutely.
just sitting on the sidelines watching all that happen, how
Zoom.
cool is that?
Yeah.
And I think every generation sort of um, has this idea that like, oh, my time is special and like this is a special time to be alive. But I think there's a really strong objective argument that can be made that this is the most interesting and innovative time to be alive in all of recorded human history that we know of.
Yeah.
So I'm just
And
happy to be here, and
no, Dan, no, I agree. And that was actually a really smooth transition. I actually even forgot what we were talking about for a little second before, but just to talk on this point, I agree with you because I mean, let's throw it back, like the internet was invented through this period. You're like not even close to, I don't know, 60 kilometers of me, but you could even be across the world and we could have this conversation right now. The amount
exactly.
of knowledge that can be passed like this is, just
I think
tremendous.
I think that had a profound effect on me as a kid too, because actually,
Also,
and maybe maybe we can talk about this too. I guess one
let's
thing I
go for
didn't
it.
mention is that when I was in high school, I was actually super religious and pretty conservative in a lot of ways. My
Mm,
senior year of high school, I was one of the leaders of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes at my
okay.
high school. My plans for after high school, I originally wanted to go to Bible college and be a
Wow.
missionary. And so I am not religious at all now. It has been quite a change for me. One aspect of that, I think, was that I got internet access, like access to a computer. I got internet access pretty early. Like I started dialing into BBSs at the end of the 80s.
Mm,
I got a Prodigy account in like 1990, 91, something like that. And then in 1992 or 93 or so, I got access to the internet itself through a system called Columbus Freenet that was a dial-in system that allowed text-based internet access. I remember doing like Gopher
text-based
searches and
internet.
like using links as a, I don't know if you're familiar with links. It was like I believe the first, or if not the first, one of the most popular text-based web browsers that were out there. So my
Not
initial, I've used the internet so long that like there weren't even images when I first started using it. I remember it was a big deal. In
yeah,
fact,
yeah.
in I think like 94, 95 or so, NCSA Mosaic, which was sort of the
Mm,
precursor to Netscape Navigator,
right.
was like I've used that. I remember downloading NCSA Mosaic browser, took forever to download, and I remember running it and thinking, how
Zoom.
cool is this that like
Yeah,
now
yeah.
there's an image on the website.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, again, you talk about how much things have changed. Right now, here we are 20 years later, and it's like, yeah, I
Can't
mean,
compare.
you've got this like dynamic content, and I mean, you could do like virtual reality stuff over the internet. Like it's only getting more advanced, and it's only growing in scale and ability and potential.
It really is. It's I think if we keep on this topic, Dan, we're gonna talk forever. I mean, we haven't even hit
How much time you
Bitcoin
got,
yet.
man? I know, right? I know.
We haven't
Well,
even
I
hit
think though,
Bitcoin yet.
talking about Bitcoin, I think talking about the internet, I think is a good precursor to talking about Bitcoin, right? Like they are
Two steps ahead of me. I
one
love it.
one can't really, well, I shouldn't say one can't exist without the other. Let's just say that, I mean, because Bitcoin actually at this point you could take down the entire internet, and there are still ways to broadcast Bitcoin transactions via satellite. There's a company called Blockstream that has satellites in orbit that can broadcast transactions to the Bitcoin blockchain. And you can also broadcast them over like ham radio, stuff
Yeah,
like that. I
yeah.
mean, so there's plenty of ways that Bitcoin
Used.
could continue to exist if the entire internet went down. But I do think that at the very beginning, it would have been very hard for Bitcoin to have come into being and had gained acceptance or any kind of scale without the internet. So I would call the internet a precursor technology to Bitcoin for sure.
For sure. So, Dan, let's talk about your journey with Bitcoin because you're mentioning that, Bitcoin played a pivotal role in your life. And I want you to take me to that first point. When did you hear about it? What did you do? How did it affect you?
Sure. So I'm going to go back a little bit before I first heard about Bitcoin, because I feel like that the conversation about
Sure.
Bitcoin is sort of fits within a broader conversation about personal finance, right? And so
Sure.
I I never got any kind of financial education growing up. My parents rented until my stepdad's mom died and then just literally left him a house. So I
Wow.
never, I never really got lessons. And I'm not blaming my parents for this, right? Like I think this is a pretty standard story for a lot of
Yep.
Americans, probably a lot of people in most first world countries. I don't know about
Even
Canada,
third
but
world.
like here in America, they don't have any kind of classes in school about personal
Same.
finance, anything like that. And so I had no foundation for that stuff. And when I turned 18, like a lot of 18-year-olds, I started getting inundated with credit card offers, right? I got a
Yeah.
Capital One credit card with like a $250 limit, which I immediately maxed out and then stopped paying on. And so
Right.
I had
Zoom.
credit for like pretty much all of my 20s. I mean, I couldn't even get credit cards. I would have to the only credit cards that I could get were prepaid. Well, not
Right.
prepaid. It's more like they're like, we'll give you a $500 credit limit if you send us a check for $500, and then
Mm.
if you don't put that
Zoom.
up after like a year or two, we'll give it back to you. That
Right.
was the
Right.
type of credit that I could get extended to me. I think at one point my credit score was in like low 500s. Like it was
Right.
not good, and that was pretty much how it was for most of my 20s. And that was that was challenging, man. Like and I guess is probably another thing to call out again if we're talking about things that like these kind of seeds that got planted that eventually ended up making me very interested in Bitcoin. When I was 23, I I got my first IT job in like 1999, so I was about 19 years old. I worked in IT for a couple of years, and then
Hmm.
dot-com bust happened. I didn't have a college degree. I had a hard time finding work in IT, and so I actually
Right.
spent about 2 to 3 years in the early 2000s working as a bill collector.
Zoom collector.
Just terrible work, man. I hated it. I
How
hated
so?
it.
Why?
Uh, well, first of all, you're making $8 an hour, $9 an hour, like so you don't have very much money yourself, and then you're calling
Mm.
people who also don't have money and trying to get money out of them. So like, you ever heard the phrase "blood from a stone"?
No, I haven't. Tell me.
Well, so blood from a stone means like it's sort of a way to say like that's a futile thing, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you're it's an exercise in futility. And
Yeah.
so calling people that are severely delinquent on their bills and trying to get them to give you money, you would have more luck getting blood from a stone. Squeezing a stone and getting blood out. So
Yeah.
anyway, so the last year or so that I worked as a bill collector, I actually worked for
Loop.
as
Hmm.
a mortgage collector. So I was calling people that were like in the process of getting evicted from their foreclosed on their homes, and just soul sucking work, man. I mean, you're basically spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, talking to people that are about to be homeless. And
Right.
because I mean, the sad reality is that if you get foreclosed on, it's not like you can just go and rent a place. A lot of places won't rent to you if you've just gone through a foreclosure because it wrecks your credit. And
Yeah.
so I just, I struggled with that a lot, man, because I was not,
That's hard.
I was living on my own. I was in my early 20s. I wasn't making very much money. So I didn't have a lot of money. I was struggling to pay my rent. And then I got to go into work and talk to people that are basically in an even worse situation. Like,
Zoom.
man, there
That
were
takes
days
a
where
toll on you.
I would cry. Like I'd go home and cry. Like I just felt so broken, and I felt like that I was contributing to an evil system, right? Like,
Mm.
I mean, which I guess, I don't know. I don't want to get in a conversation about like the merits of capitalism. I do think that capitalism has some merits. I think that
For
these
sure.
are kind of the kinds of situations though where like the real like heartlessness of capitalism is sort of revealed, right? This
Yep.
idea of like I was listening to What Bitcoin Did. It's Peter McCormick's podcast. I don't know if you're
Okay.
familiar with that. It's like one of the most popular Bitcoin podcasts. And I like a lot of the stuff that Peter himself talks about, but man, some of his guests are just, they're a little out there. Like he had this like super libertarian guy on there that was
Yep.
talking about his like ideal like libertarian anarchic society, and he said this thing at one point that he's like, well, yeah, in our country you can either work or starve.
Wow.
And I was just like, whoa, like,
Wow.
man, I mean, honestly, I gotta say, I props to him for being so honest, because I don't think that a lot of libertarians would just outright say that, because I think most of them probably have the mental acuity, we'll call it, or like awareness to
Yep.
realize that is
Zoom.
callous as hell, and it makes you sound like an evil.
Zoom. Yeah.
But like that's pretty much what I felt like. I felt like that I was in a position where like, I was telling people to, one of the things that we were supposed to tell people was to like call their friends and ask to borrow money so that they weren't going to
Yeah.
be homeless, And so anyway, I did that for like a year and a half.
Man.
And then I think they were trying to cut expenses
Loop.
because they started this program where you could take as many days off as you wanted, but they were just unpaid. And
Yep.
so I started taking days off here and there. And then that eventually just turned into like just not going into work anymore, just because I was just done with it.
Yep.
And anyway, long story short, I left. They gave me my last check, direct deposit into my bank, which I banked with a bank that
Loop.
was actually in the process of acquiring at the time. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
a regional bank called
Loop.
and so this
Right.
was during the process that they were acquiring.
Loop.
So they deposited my last paycheck into my Bank One account, and then about 28 days later, they took it all back. They did
Wow.
not call me. They did not send me a letter. This was a little bit before people were using email a lot. So we'll say, phone call or a letter would have been great. They had my phone number and my address. They could have done either or both, but they chose not to. And obviously, I had spent some of that money in the 28 days between when they paid me and when they took it back.
Yep.
They claim they overpaid me, by the way, but I kept such bad records at that point. I don't think that's true, but I couldn't prove it one way or the other.
Yep.
Anyway, ended up throwing me about 500, 600 bucks into the negative after all the fees and everything, which I could not afford at that point because I didn't have a job. I literally just walked out of my job, which, that's on me. That was a bad choice on my part. But anyway, the long story short, it ended up going to Check Systems. I don't know if you guys have that up in Canada. It's
What's
basically
that?
it's like a credit bureau, but for checking or for bank accounts. So like
Okay.
if you have a bank account and it goes into the negative and you don't pay it off, eventually, I think after about like 5 to 6 months or so, the bank writes that off and then they submit you to Check Systems. Once you are on Check Systems, you're there for 3 years. And most banks, there are some banks now, I think, that are a little less stringent about this. 15 years ago, though, there were no banks that would open an account for you if you had a record
Wow.
on Check Systems. So I spent 3 years from about 2004 to 2007. I spent 3 years without a bank account. I couldn't open one. I
That
can't
sounds like a
tell you
motivator
how
for Bitcoin. Zoom.
annoying that was, man. Yeah, well, Bitcoin didn't exist then, right? So
Right.
so I had to go to check cashing places to cash my payroll checks. I had to pay a 5% fee for every payroll check that I cashed for that 3 years until I will say, because I like to talk to people and I just make connections with people. That's what I do. I did end up finding a bodega owner about a block from my house at the time that said he would cash my check for $1 or he'd waive that if I bought something there. And so I'd usually just go and buy like some beer and
Yeah.
buy a beer and cash my paycheck basically. But like everything, I mean, other things too, man, like paying my electric bill, right? Because I didn't have checks. And so at one point a money order got lost. And so I stopped using money orders because that sucks to buy a money order for like 100, 150 bucks. And then it just vanishes. That money's gone. And so I started using, I would like go to the customer service counter at the grocery store and pay my bills that way in cash. But again, there's a fee, or you're using like Western Digital, there's a fee. Everything is a fee. And it's like, they're nickel and diming the people who don't have nickels and dimes. So I think that I wasn't a huge fan of banks to begin with, right? Like before that, if you asked me like, what do you think of banks? I would have been like,
Yeah. And Dan, it's interesting you mentioned that. I remember watching a documentary, I believe it was on YouTube. I can't remember the name for the life of me right now, but it was actually talking about that. The people that don't know how banks work and the people who don't have money to begin with are the people that are actually funding the majority of the bank's well, I can't say that, but a decent chunk of it.
It's a lot. Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with taxes, man. Like, I don't know about Canada, but here in the States, we have so many freaking loopholes that if you're rich and you've got somebody that knows how to exploit those loopholes.
Yep.
I mean, look at Donald Trump, man. The guy paid what, $750 in taxes in like 2015 and 2016, or I'm probably getting the years wrong. I'm sure somebody will send you an email talking about what an idiot I am and how I got all that wrong. But it's like when you've got billionaires, which he's at least a millionaire. So let's just say he's a millionaire. You got millionaires paying less in taxes than people who are just above the poverty line. I think there's a real problem with that.
Yep.
Right. And I think that, anyway, so like that, I think definitely in part set the stage for me of getting into Bitcoin several years later. So that was about starting around 2007, I could open bank accounts again. So since
Okay.
then, for the last 13 years, I've exclusively used credit unions. I will not bank with large banks anymore.
Hmm,
I won't do it. The only exception is that if I have to, right? Like,
for
ironically, my
sure.
mortgage is now owned by,
Loop.
which I'm not actually happy about. We got it originally through a regional bank here in the Pacific Northwest, and after a year, they sold it,
Loop.
and I was honestly really pissed
Yeah.
because if I had my say, I would never do business with
Loop.
you again for the rest of my life. Fuck.
So, Dan, we're nearing kind of almost an hour right now, and we still haven't got into your story about Bitcoin or the fact that you
I
actually
do ramble.
ran
Yeah,
for
yeah.
election, So like
Sure.
let's kind of try to talk about the main points just going over
Yeah.
there, because I have a bunch of questions I want to ask you because I'm interested
Sure.
in this, right? So,
Yeah, let's talk about Bitcoin first, maybe, if that works for you, just because I feel like we
sure.
sort of set the stage.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that you had a lot of financial hardships and, you just weren't a fan of the banking system? How did you discover Bitcoin? Is there anything in between that you want to add, or?
Yeah, so I first heard about Bitcoin in, I want to say, early 2011.
Mm,
And in fact, I think it was right around the time that I lost my job in April 2011. I'd have to look up the exact date, but I
yeah.
remember I used to be a big Slashdot reader. I don't know if you're familiar with
No, what's
Slashdot.org.
that?
It's Slashdot is like their tagline used to be, it may still be, I haven't read the site in a while, but their tagline used to be news for nerds, stuff that matters. So it's sort of like Reddit, but with a very
Techie.
strong technical bent,
Yeah.
right? Like, and they ran a front page story when one Bitcoin hit parity with the US dollar. So one Bitcoin equals $1.
How times have changed.
I remember reading that, right? I know. I remember reading that article and I thought, that's cool. What is Bitcoin? And I looked it up. And it was basically like, my takeaway from it at that point, which is probably mostly accurate given the time frame, was that, oh, cool, people are using this to buy drugs online. And then I read that you could mine it on your computer.
Mm,
And I briefly considered mining Bitcoin on my computer, which at the time,
right.
I don't know if you're familiar with SETI at home or folding at home.
No, what's up?
It's basically so folding at home, SETI at home. They're basically programs that you run on your computer that you can run them as your screensaver. So when your screensaver kicks on, it downloads packets of information from the internet and then processes them. For folding at home, it's doing, as the name would imply, protein folding. So you're basically running simulations on, like, I'm not a biologist. I don't actually know what the
Zoom.
protein folding is. I think it has something to do with like how certain chemicals interact with maybe like drug. I don't know, but it's you're basically running like simulation, like biological simulations using your computer's processing power. It's a distributed network, right? So you've got this entire network of computers. It's sort of like a botnet, except people like know that they're doing it. Right? Anyway, so that was when I first heard about Bitcoin. Was when one Bitcoin equals $1 US. And given everything else that was going on in my life, right? 2011 was a crazy year for me. I moved 2,000 miles. I lost, it's somebody that I deeply loved, and just it just wasn't on my radar at all for that year or really the year after even. Once I got settled into Portland, though, as you may guess, I'm a big Redditor, right? That's how we connected, and so I used to be very active on the Portland subreddit when I lived there. And there was a guy that posted towards the end of 2013. There was a guy that posted, and he said, "Hey, I drive a Nissan Leaf electric car, right? Electric car that only has like a 70-mile range. And I want to take a road trip to Utah, but I don't want to pull over and charge my car every, hour. And so I'm hoping to find somebody who has a hybrid that they would be willing to trade with my wife and I for like 2 weeks while we're taking this road trip to Utah." Well, at the time, I worked at a job in downtown Portland that had free electric vehicle charging in the parking lot, and so I was also kind of interested in buying a Leaf, and I thought, this is great. I can get, first of all, free gas at my company. They can charge my car for me while I'm at work 5 days a week, and I get to like have an extended test drive of this car that I'm thinking about buying before I bought one. And so, I responded and said, "Hey, man, and I had a Prius. I drove a Prius at the time." And so I commented and I was like, "Hey, I'm super interested in checking out your Leaf, and I have a Prius with low mileage, super reliable car. I'd be more than willing to do this, but I'd like to meet first, right? Like I want to make sure you're not like a weirdo or something, or at least no more weird than I am.
Don't damage the car."
Yep, exactly. And so I worked in downtown Portland at the time, and I worked a couple of blocks away from give another shout out here. I worked a couple of blocks away from this awesome pizza place in downtown Portland called Old Town Pizza. And so I met up with this guy in Old Town Pizza, and we had lunch, and we talked about Bitcoin. He mentioned it, he brought it up, and I had heard of it. And so like, and this was right after the like $1,300 spike. Like Bitcoin had gone from like $200 to like 1,300. You know, huge, like huge bubble, kind of like 2017 as far as like the percentage increase. If you look at the chart, it was like that, you know, that that like severe parabolic increase. And so we chatted about it for a while at that lunch. And then at the end, he said, "Hey man, how would you feel about paying for our lunch on your credit card, or, you know, however you want or whatever, and I'll give you my half in Bitcoin." And I was all about that. Like, hell yeah, man. I made okay money at the time, whatever. It's like, I think our lunch was like $30 with the pizza and the beer and all that stuff. So you're basically talking about like $15, you know, worth of Bitcoin. I said, hell yeah, man, let's do it. And we did. And we ended up, and then we traded cars, and they came back, and we ended up staying in touch. Like we became friends. Like I really liked him. He was a nice guy. He was like a tech guy.
There you go.
We have a similar story. He actually grew up as a Mormon. But is no longer religious. And so like I wasn't a Mormon, but I was also devoutly religious in the past and no longer am. And so we had like a few things that we kind of bonded over. We're still friends to this day, 7 years later. And that's what really got me into Bitcoin. So after that was December of 2013. By January, I had bought my first Bitcoin on Coinbase, not a full Bitcoin, but like, you know, $50 worth of Bitcoin. At the time that I got into Bitcoin, it was, I want to say when I first got into it, it was about half of that initial, that like previous peak. So it was around $600-700.
Right.
And I was like, hell yeah, man. Like, cause in my mind, I'm like, okay, it's going to go back to 1,300. So I'm going to buy as much as I can. I bought a bunch of it at like $600-700. I mean, a bunch for me at the time. I wasn't making a lot of money, but for me, I bought a decent amount of Bitcoin. I probably had about $1,000-2,000 worth. And then it dropped to like 250. And I freaked out, man, because I had never done any kind of investing before. I had never done any kind of investing before at all. I mean, beyond just beyond a very small amount of money in a 401k that I had actually cashed out right around that time, because I ended up getting fired. I got fired from my job after I tried to start a union. So that was a fun time. And so I found myself out of work, and Bitcoin dropped like right after that. And so I freaked out and I sold it all at a huge loss, right? Like I sold it for like less than half of what I paid for it. Then it went back up. It went back up to like $500-600. Then it went up to like 800. And then it went back down. And it's like, so basically, I mean, in the time that I've been involved, Bitcoin has been as low as like mid 200s. I think 225 is the lowest price per Bitcoin that I've ever paid. And then just a few years later, it was at 20 grand. So like I have personally been involved with Bitcoin while it has gone 100x. So $200 to 2,000 to 20,000. And I think that was what really sold me. Like I wasn't really, and I hesitate to use this word just because of the religious connotations, but I wasn't a true believer until 2017. Like I had Bitcoin, I had a little bit of Bitcoin. Ironically, when we bought our house 4 years ago in November 2016, I tried to talk my wife into, because I knew that the halving had happened right in 2016. And I thought that there might be an increase in 2017. I didn't think it was going to be anything like it ended up being. I was thinking maybe Bitcoin will go to like $5,000-10,000, something like that. And so I told my wife in November of 2016, I said, hey, we have about $15,000 for our house down payment. Bitcoin was under $1,000 at the time, by the way. I said, let's take that money. I said, let's buy Bitcoin with it and hold it for 1 year. That way we'll hold it a little over 1 year, and then we'll sell it. That way we don't have to pay, we'll get long-term capital gains tax instead of short-term. And then, then we'll use that as our house down payment. Now, if she had listened to me, we could have bought our house in cash. We could like not have a mortgage now. But I do want to be clear though, that honestly, that probably wasn't the best idea. Like, cause it would have been purely speculative, right? And more than half of that down payment was her money. So ultimately,
fair enough.
We ended up buying the house, and then I spent most of 2017 trying to restack the Bitcoin that I had cashed out to buy the house. And so I didn't really have much. I didn't have much when the crazy 2017 year happened.
Right.
I've spent the years since then, though, I have been buying Bitcoin like crazy between 2018 and 2020 because I strongly suspect that we are about to see a repeat. Or, what's that saying? History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. I think we're about to see a
Hmm.
sort of parallel movement in 2021 that will. I don't know that it'll be, percentage-wise the same kind of increase that we saw in 2017, but I do think that when you look at the chart, you're going to see a near parabolic move by the
Wow.
end of 2021. And I could be wrong. I don't have
Yeah.
a crystal ball. Bitcoin could just as easily go to 5-10 grand again. I do
Yep.
think though that one thing that I've noticed from a sentiment standpoint, there's definitely a lot of like bigger money getting in, right? Like earlier this year, what's his name, Paul Tudor Jones, who's a sort of famed investor who, as I understand it, he got his reputation or sort of made his name by shorting the stock market right before a huge crash in the 80s. And
Yeah.
so he's very well known as a guy who, a lot of people listen to what he says. And
Sure.
he made a big statement earlier this year when he said he put, I think it was only like 1 or 2% or something like that of his assets into Bitcoin. But when you're talking about somebody who's a billionaire, right, 1 to 2%, I mean, it's a substantial amount of money.
Yep.
I think we've seen companies start to do similar. Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy invested, I think, something like 10% of their fiat reserves into Bitcoin.
Wow.
Square Cash App invested $50 million of their cash reserves into Bitcoin. I mean, when you look at, yes, Bitcoin is volatile, obviously, but when you look at a
Yeah.
chart of Bitcoin purchasing power over the last 10 years, and then look at a chart of the US dollar's purchasing power over the next 10 years, or the last 10 years, I think that,
Mhm.
that's not, obviously, it's not a guarantee that the next 10 years will mirror that, but I do think that there's a much stronger argument for the retention of purchasing power. I've been telling anybody that'll listen that, maybe you don't trust Bitcoin. Maybe you think that it's hot air. Maybe you think that it's based on nothing. Maybe you think that it's all a
Mhm.
scam or a Ponzi scheme or a multi-level marketing scheme. Those are all criticisms that I've heard about Bitcoin over the last 7
Sure.
years. But yet it persists, and it not only
Mm.
persists, but it grows and it continues to grow. More and more people are interested every day. It's not going away. So to those people who are skeptical, I would ask you to consider that maybe there are things that other people are seeing that you are not.
Hmm.
And that if you are in a position where you can take we'll just say 1 to 5%, it depends on the person, right? It depends on what your investment profile is, depends on how much
Sure.
risk you're willing to take. But if you have investments already, right, if you're at the stage of your life where you're making investments, I personally think that it's unwise to not have a position in Bitcoin, even if it's a small,
Sure.
like 1 to 5%.
Yep.
At this point, the asymmetric returns that people have gotten, even investing 1% of your
Yeah.
overall investment portfolio into Bitcoin, that could, a few years down the line, that could end up being like 10 to 20% of your portfolio.
Yep.
And if you don't believe in Bitcoin at that point, then cash it out, redistribute it, redistribute your
Exactly.
portfolio so that you're back to 1% exposure to Bitcoin and take your profits. And that's fine. I
Absolutely.
mean, personally, I don't do that. I have not sold a single Bitcoin since like for like 5 years,
Yeah.
and so I don't plan on selling for a while. My hope is that, and I do have some traditional investments. I want to be clear. I'm not just fully banking on Bitcoin. I will say I'm
Yep.
probably a little over leveraged on it as compared to my other investments.
Sure.
I actually cashed out my 401k earlier this year and put it all into Bitcoin, which
True
is
believer.
probably not something that most people should do. Yeah, I look here's the way that I think of it, man. I'm going to be really honest with you. Up until like 5 years ago, I'd say up until the age of 35, my
Mm.
plan A, my plan A was to work until the day I died.
Right.
Because I didn't grow up with money. I didn't start making
Yep.
investments until later in life, right? So like I just sort of assumed that like, well, yeah, I have a small 401k, but like I'm not gonna live off of that. There's nobody, I couldn't live off of that for even a year. So
Yep.
like I'm just gonna have to work until the day I die. And that was my plan
Mm.
A for like most of my life, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, here in the States, my generation, we've all been told that there's not going to be any Social Security by the time I'm ready to retire.
Yeah.
And so like I had just sort of prepared myself for that. Now, now I would say that's like my plan C. Plan C is to work until I die. Plan A is
Yeah.
to retire within the next 10 years from my
Wow.
Bitcoin investments. Plan B is to retire within the next 20 years from my traditional investments. So like I hope to be retired at the age of 60 by the latest. We'll see, how that ends up working out. One thing that we didn't touch on too, I think another thing that kind of set the stage for me getting into Bitcoin,
Mm.
I mentioned that I had credit
Zoom.
for most of my 20s.
Yep.
At about the age of 30, it was actually right before Katie died, about a year before Katie died. I just got sick of like not being able to get any credit. You know, it's like I couldn't get a
Mm.
car loan, I couldn't get a credit card. I had trouble renting places.
Yep.
You know, years before that, my credit had improved a little bit by that point, so I could at least like get an apartment. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but I just got tired of it, man. And I said, you know, something has got to change. Like, what do I need to do to like get on top of this? And so, um, I worked out a system again, like most things in my life, mostly through trial and error. I worked out a system where I have a bill calendar now, and
Mm.
I've kept it up for almost a decade. What I did was I just used Google Calendar. I created you know how you can create like multiple calendars in Google. I created
Yep.
a calendar just for my bills, or I call it financial. And on that calendar, I list my paydays on the calendar by, you know, every day that I get paid. And on that payday, I also have a calendar event for every single bill that gets paid on that payday. When I
Hmm.
get paid, I go down the list, and I will double click on each one as I pay it, and I will change it to put paid at the end. I just append paid at the end. So that way I can
That's a good
see at a
system.
glance which of my bills have been paid, which of my bills need to be paid, you know, and it has changed my life. I mean, I have a terrible memory, right? And so I think that was really, it's not that I didn't want to pay my bills, right? Like I
You
wanted
just
to pay
forgot.
my bills. I didn't want to be a deadbeat. You know, like I don't
No.
like owing people money. It's a bad position to be in. It makes me feel
Yep.
bad. But the like the will was there, but like the follow through, I didn't have the tools required to follow through. So, you know, I found something that works for me, and honestly, it works so well that if it had just been me, I would be hesitant to even say like, oh, you know, do this and it'll probably help. But when my wife and I started dating 7 years ago, she had terrible credit. Her credit
Mm.
was, I think, like it was like mine was. It was like low 500s, you know, at its worst point. Her credit score is like 810 now, dude. Like her credit is
Wow.
actually better than mine. My credit is like high 700s. Hers is 810,
Wow.
and it's because of that same thing. We did the same thing for her that we've done for me, and over the last 7 years, we took her credit from, you know, bottom tier to. I mean, she's 7 years younger than me, so she has better credit than like 99% of people her age, and it
Yeah.
is literally just from having the discipline to like figure out which bills need to be paid on which paychecks, write them out, and then just meticulously stick to that every payday. It
Yeah.
works. It
It
absolutely
does.
works. And if I had not done that, man, if I had not made those steps, I think before I got into Bitcoin several years later, I don't think I would have been in the position to really do anything with Bitcoin because I wouldn't have had any extra money. You know, I paid so much money in bank fees over the years, man, like overdrafting my accounts and stuff. You know, I just wouldn't have had it available.
Yeah. And you know, I was watching another documentary and they were mentioning that the reason why they have such odd dates for banking is so people forget, right?
Oh,
Because, you know,
there's so
a
many
lot of,
sketchy things, man. I mean,
yeah.
like, I don't think they're allowed to do this by law anymore. But for the longest time, they could put through, like, if you had a bunch of pending transactions, they could put through the most expensive one first. And so,
Mm.
like, just to give you an example of how that works, let's say you had $1,000 in your account, right? And let's say you had 10 transactions pending. One of them was for $800, and then the other nine were for 100, right? So if they put those nine charges for $100 through first, then you'd still have $100 left when that $800 charge goes through, and you'd
Right.
only get one overdraft fee. Instead, what they do is they put the $800 charge first, so that now you've got only $200 available, and then they put two of the $200 payments through, right? And now you've got $700 payments left,
Yeah.
and every single one of them gets you a $35, $40 overdraft fee. That is not an accident. You
Yeah.
know, there is some
Zoom.
out there who came up with that system on purpose, and then every single bank did it for like decades. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's I don't know that you could get in any I don't know that you could ask for a clearer lesson that these people are not your friends and they're not looking out for your interests in any way.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. Yeah. The banking system's just, it's interesting because, you know, it's something that everyone has to do. yet we don't get taught in school. And, you know, I think in North America, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but talking about money is just kind of frowned upon a little bit as well, you know, like how much you make, how to make more
Yep.
money, and even like if the money are good or bad. And it's a shame because, you know, it's such a big part of our life. And since it's frowned upon to have these conversations, you know, for example, you're mentioning the union job, right? Like you stood up and you're like, yeah, we need better rights, and fired. And then, you know, I don't know the exact story behind it, but it could be labeled as, oh, that's just, you know, that's just political or something like that.
Well,
And,
we
and
waited months actually. So we tried to we had the union
yeah,
vote in like November of 2013, and then they fired me in May of 2013, and they they fired me on May 1st, which is May Day. That is an international workers' holiday, by the way.
mm,
And again, I don't think that that was an accident. And I've had people ask, well, how do you know that they knew it was May Day? Well, that's an easy one because our offices were in downtown Portland, where every single year on May Day, there is a massive May Day protest to the point where the Portland Business Alliance sends out reminders and warnings to businesses letting them know that there will be massive throngs of people there for May Day protests. So they definitely knew, and it was also a Thursday, so it's not like it just happened to coincide with like the end of the like Friday or anything like that.
yeah,
Fired me on May Day 6 months after we tried to unionize, to send a message. You know, message
no.
received.
Fair enough.
That company, by the way, it's
Loop.
which ironically is a nonprofit that works in the education sector. You would think that, you know, would be maybe a little more workers' rights friendly, but so it is.
Yeah. I just want to get into the meat of it now.
Yeah. Hey, ask me your questions and I'll do my best to answer them as concisely as I can, which is probably not very concise.
No, for sure. So, you know, you're mentioning that you had the financial struggles and Bitcoin was a game changer for you. I want you to talk specifically about that because I know you talked about the fact that you invested in it and went up and down, but how did Bitcoin actually act as that game changer?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so for the first few years, and I'm going to say that this is all hypothetical just because I'm not really sure about the legality of it. But for the first, so like the very first time I bought Bitcoin, I bought it on localbitcoins.com.
Yep.
And the method of buying it, I went into a US bank.
Yep.
And I gave the teller cash and said, deposit this to this account number. And then I took the receipt and I wrote the date and my local Bitcoins username on it. And then I had to take a picture of it and send it to the guy on local Bitcoins, who then sent me my Bitcoins. Dude, it felt so sketchy. I honestly, like the whole time I'm in this bank, I'm like looking over my shoulder and I'm like half expecting some like, you know, G-man to come up behind me and be like, oh, you know. And then I decided to start buying and selling Bitcoin on local Bitcoins. And I didn't do it for a profit because, again, I had a day job at the time. I did it because I thought it was a really interesting way to learn about Bitcoin and to meet other people who are interested in it. Ironically, I ended up getting immortalized for this. I have a friend of mine who's a science fiction author. I'll give a shout out to my friend, William Hertling. He wrote a science fiction series called Avogadro Corp that's about an emergent AI. Avogadro is basically Google. In the book, it's sort of an analog of Google. And they inadvertently develop a strong AI that, like, it's a really interesting series. It's like a 3-part series, highly recommended. After that, though, he wrote a book called Kill Process that's about a gal who works at a social media company that's basically Facebook, but you know, has a different name. But she works at a social media company and she uses her access at this company to find men who are abusing their significant others, and then she kills them. And so she's basically a serial killer, but it's sort of like Dexter, right? Like she's killing only bad people. And so the book is called Kill Process. And in that book, there's a story thread in that book where this was written in like 2014, I think. So like you got to realize maybe 2015, something like that. This is several years ago, back when the overall Bitcoin economy was much smaller. And so there's this story thread in the book where she manipulates the price of Bitcoin by buying a ton of it using this company's money that she works for. And she does that through a guy on local Bitcoins. And the guy is named, in the book, Dimon, DIMMN, which
Yep.
stands for Danger is my middle name. And that's me.
Hey.
I'm that character in the book. And what's funny is Will told me that I guess I inspired that, where there was a time where I'm sure he still does this, but I don't live in Portland, so I can't go anymore. But he used to do like a monthly gathering for writers, and we'd all just get together and have some beers and chat, and just talk about craft, and then just talk about really anything. And there was one time where we were meeting at the Kennedy School in
Yep.
Portland, which is this I don't know if you've ever been there. It's like this old school that got bought and turned into a bar. And so like all these different rooms in the school have like different, there's like a boiler room bar, for instance, where you can go and sit in the old boiler room and like have drinks and stuff. So we're there, and I had my laptop with me, and I got a trade request for local Bitcoin trade. And so I actually met up with the guy there at the writers group. I said, well, hey, I'm at Kennedy School right now, like come on by. And so he came by, bought some Bitcoin off of me, and I guess that transaction ended up inspiring Will to like include this this scene in the book. So anyway, so to answer your question, for like a couple of years, I was, I think, the lowest percentage wise, right? Because I didn't take a profit at all. The only upcharge that I charged was the fee that I had to pay to buy the Bitcoin. So I was paying like I think a 1% to 2% fee at the time when I bought the Bitcoin.
Right.
And so when I would sell it to somebody else, I would only charge a 1% to 2% fee. Most everybody else in Portland was charging like 4% or 5%. So I mean, I was undercutting them by quite a bit. Now I didn't do a huge volume just because again, I had a day job. I wasn't trying to do it. I was really doing it more for fun. But anyway, I did that for like a couple of years. My wife and I took a road trip out back to Ohio to visit some of my friends in 2014. And I don't think we used an ATM once. I mean, I did local Bitcoin trades in cities along the way. I remember there was I did like a local Bitcoins trade in a hookah bar on Ohio State campus for like a few $100 bucks. And that few $100 bucks was like, that's all that we spent the entire time that we were in Ohio. So It's like, I didn't have to use my bank account at all for that, because I just sold a little bit of Bitcoin, and, that financed our trip. And so like I think that trip was what kind of really opened my eyes to the potential of like, this could someday replace my bank account, right? Like here I am traveling thousands of miles away from home, and I'm not using my bank at all. Now, ideally it would have been great to be able to spend the Bitcoin directly, right? But we just weren't there yet. I mean, we're not there yet now. We're a little closer, but we definitely weren't there yet, 6 years ago. But like that's just one example. I think, for me, I think the biggest change though that Bitcoin has brought to me is like the thinking long term. I was thinking about it before we chatted today, right? It's sort of a joke about how people, it's kind of become a trope about like that interview question of like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I don't think that people ask that a lot during interviews anymore, only because I would suspect, I've never asked this question during an interview. I've held interviews before, but I've never really found much value in that question, because I feel like that the answers that you get are going to be mostly
Zoom.
And I think the reason for that is because most people, myself included, aren't great at thinking long term, right? Like we're all very concerned about like the immediate needs of whatever's happening in our lives right now. And I mean, sometimes you might think a year down the line, maybe for planning like I just got married a year ago, and we spent a year and a half planning the wedding. So like there are some occasions where I think we are better at long-term planning, but on the whole, we think very short term as a species. And I think as a result of that, it's a great example is like when I panic sold that for, when I first got into Bitcoin, because I wasn't thinking in a long-term time frame. I was thinking like, I'm going to buy this at $600 and it's going right back up to 1,300 and I'm going to be rich. Every dollar I put in is going to turn into 2.
Yeah.
Well, when you go into something with that kind of mindset and then it doesn't work out, I mean, that's panic inducing, man. Like you're, because you haven't made a plan, because you have not really thought through all the potentials of how that might go. Now, I mean, so to give you an example of like how my mindset has changed, several years ago when it dropped by half, I panic sold. In March of this year, on March 13th, Bitcoin dropped to below $4,000. from like, I think it was over 9,000 prior to that,
Yep.
like a day or two before. I bought Bitcoin at 38.60. I bought some. I didn't sell any. I bought some. And so that's like a complete reversal of attitude between now and, whatever, 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
And the reason why, though, is because I have lived through it. Look, man, I think, like, for me, I think every day that Bitcoin continues, to me, that only makes it more and more inevitable that it's here to stay and that it will absolutely dominate the financial world. I think that,
Dominate.
oh,
Wow.
absolutely. Are you familiar with gray goo in like a nanotechnology context?
No, I'm not. That's
Gray
some
goo
sort of
is like
conjecture or something?
Well, gray goo is like we'll call it a science fiction worst case scenario, right? Because we
Okay.
don't really have functional nanotechnology yet. But
Okay.
gray goo is like a worst case scenario envisioned for nanotechnology where, you develop a self-replicating nanotech that consumes and creates new nanotech, right? And if you don't
Interesting.
do that correctly, there is a possibility that it could literally consume the entire planet in a swarming gray goo of nanotechnology, that it just expands and consumes everything in its path until there's just nothing left except for the gray goo.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the gray goo of the financial system.
In a positive light, though.
Well, sort of. I mean, I guess so. I guess the one difference is that, Bitcoin itself is not self-replicating. I think the idea of Bitcoin, though, is self-replicating. Like the cat is out of the bag, I guess you could say at this point. I don't think even now, right? I think a lot of people know they know of Bitcoin, right? Like if I said, have you heard of Bitcoin? I think most people, not everybody, but most people at this point would say yes. I like to ask a follow-up question, though, of like, what do you think Bitcoin is?
True.
Almost nobody gets that right.
So let me ask you a question, Dan. What do you think Bitcoin is?
I was hoping you would ask that. So I'm actually gonna self-promote here for a quick second before I answer the question. I
Sure.
actually presented a speech. I think I mentioned earlier, I've been a Toastmaster for the last 2 years. And I really have found a lot of value in that. It's improved my public speaking. It's made me feel a lot more confident when in front of crowds. I feel like that my leadership and time management skills have improved. One thing that I want to use Toastmasters for, and have started to do that, is I love explaining technology to people, right? I come from like a support background. So my early career, I spent a lot of time explaining technical concepts to lay persons. And
Sure.
I gave a speech a few months ago now, I want to say probably like June, July. I gave a speech in my Toastmasters group titled, "What is Bitcoin?" And the reason that I wanted to do this is because, I love my Toastmasters group. I'm not trying to knock them, but the average age of that group is probably like 50, 55 years old.
Yeah.
It's not a young group. At 40 years old, I think I'm probably one of the top like 5 younger people in the group. And so I kind of look at that as a challenge, right? Because like you're talking to a group of older folks who aren't, historically maybe the most technologically savvy. And so that was sort of the challenge to me, was to present this in a way that
they can understand.
that they can understand. And I think that that people got it. So look, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the Bitcoin white paper abstract is the best example of just an elevator pitch of Bitcoin. And I'll read it verbatim just so I don't mangle it or anything. The abstract of the Bitcoin white paper, which by the way, I suggest that everybody reads. I'm pretty sure the URL for it is just bitcoin.org/bitcoin.pdf. The abstract states that Bitcoin is a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash that would allow for online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. And that's really it. I mean, we could get a lot more in depth. Honestly, we could spend 2 entire hours talking about just what is Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I feel like I could probably spend 2 hours talking about that. At the end of the day, though, it's like the internet, man. Like, I don't think that, do you have any idea like how TCP/IP and DNS works on the internet?
I don't. I will stroke my beard like I do, though.
Right. Oh, yes. But you use the internet every day, right?
Yep.
You use the internet almost every day, like most of us do. Most people have no idea how the internet works. Hell, I barely do, and I've spent 20 years working in IT. But
Hmm.
we still use it every day, and it has absolutely changed the landscape of the entire world, right?
Yep.
Economically, socially. Bitcoin will be the same thing, man. Like, I think I think right now, because it's still so new, like when I first started using the internet, it's a great example. I mean, like
Yeah.
dialing up into or like a BBS, for instance, dialing into a BBS and then accessing like a forum, or dialing into Freenet and accessing a web page on links. I don't know that there are many people that could do that today, even with the like immersion of technology that we have, just because it's so foreign to like where we are now in the current
Yeah.
implementation of those technologies. Bitcoin 10 years from now will be so similar. I mean, there's like, you'll look back on the process for how to do things right now and just laugh about like how overly complex it all is. Like, there is
Yep.
still, even 12 years in, a very high technical barrier of entry to do
There is.
Bitcoin right, to do it right, right? If we're talking about like self custody, not leaving it on an exchange, setting up a hardware wallet, having good operational security, those things are not things that people normally think about, and rightly so, because they're not daily things that we run into.
Dan, to
Um,
even go a bit further, not even only how to set it up right, how to even set it up, period. Like,
Well, and so that, yeah, so I'll give a shout out. So I created I did create a website that's like sort of we'll call it a corollary to that presentation that I gave.
sure.
And it's basically just an introduction to Bitcoin site where I've curated a few links. Like my
We'll
favorite one
throw
on
it in the
there that I'll give a
description.
shout out to. There's a guy named Jameson Lopp who he's
Mhm.
a big Bitcoin guy. He's a founder of a company called Casa that's well known in the space. He has a great website that's called Getting Started with Bitcoin that's linked on this page. And I mean, there's probably dozens, maybe even hundreds of hours of material on that website. So like if you have listeners that are looking to go down that rabbit hole, like there are definitely good resources out there. And I've
Mhm.
tried really hard to find them and curate them, because there are a lot of scammers in the space. There are a lot of people that, they're going to try and draw you in so they can give you a sales pitch. I hate that kind of,
Zoom.
and so I've tried
Yep.
to stay away from it and find people that are also staying away from it. But
Yep.
that website is 10binary.io/Bitcoin. It's super ugly right now. Like, it has no CSS. It's literally just like a list of links. I do plan on cleaning it up at some point, but there's a lot of good stuff there. And at the bottom, there are actually some links for different places where you can buy Bitcoin. They are referral links. You don't have to use them though. I honestly don't care. It's like $10 in Bitcoin. I'm not going to cry if I don't get it. But if you want to use those referral links, you can. And then there's a link there too about how to secure your wallet. But honestly, too, beyond that, if you have any listeners that are, that go through this episode and they're like, man, I want to find out more about Bitcoin, totally welcome to reach out to me. I'm at
Yeah.
no one danger on Twitter. I honestly, I love answering questions about Bitcoin. That's why I run a monthly Bitcoin meetup group here in my town. That's why I talk about it so much. That's why I have a big poster of it on my wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm always happy to talk about it. But honestly,
Yeah.
how to get into Bitcoin is easier than ever now. I mean, if you don't care about self custody, about putting it on a hardware wallet, which in my opinion you should, but again, there are plenty of people that don't. If you don't care about that and you're just going to leave it on an exchange account, sign up for Cash App, Coinbase, Gemini, any of those sites. You can buy Bitcoin for a very low fee. You can buy I think I know on Cash App and Coinbase, I'm not sure about Gemini, but I know on the first two you can buy it with a credit card even, which
Mhm.
again, I don't really suggest, but there are plenty of people that do.
Yeah.
Credit card, bank account, wire transfer. There's so many different ways to buy it now, and these sites like Cash App is owned by Square. Coinbase is one of the largest exchanges in the world. Gemini, same thing, one of the largest exchanges in the world. Coinbase and Gemini both do their banking services through Chase. They're like, legit. Like,
Right. Right.
there are fewer and fewer fly-by-night companies in this space, fortunately, by the day, and so that's been
Yeah.
nice to see. But
Yeah. So, Dan, let me ask you a question. I'm
sure.
not sure if you had sales experience, but I'm going to assume you've had. And as a strong advocate of Bitcoin, I hope that it can at least be a little bit easier for this question. So, I'm a podcaster. I don't really, I'm kind of that typical person who knows Bitcoin but doesn't really know Bitcoin, that just thinks,
Sure.
it's for illegal substances, really crazy, weird stuff. Well, not weird stuff, but things that you wouldn't find on the normal internet.
Sure.
Why should I use Bitcoin, and what benefits could I get from it other than anonymity?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think there's a common misconception that Bitcoin is anonymous. It's not. It's Bitcoin
Oh,
is
really?
pseudonymous. Yeah, Bitcoin is pseudonymous, which I mean, it's a minor distinction, right? But really, what it comes down to is the entire point of Bitcoin is that it is a distributed ledger. So every Bitcoin node, which I've got a little Raspberry
Yeah.
Pi over here that's running a
Yeah.
node. Every single node has a complete copy of the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the blockchain is just a fancy way to say it's
Like a
literally just
transcript in a ledger.
it is a list of every single Bitcoin
Transaction.
transaction
Yeah.
since January 2009. That's
Yeah.
that's it. That's all it is. And so, but that's like 300 gigs of data at this point because we're talking about 12
Wow.
years of transactions. And so you
Yeah.
basically got every single Bitcoin node, which there are I don't even know. I mean, there's at least 20,000 known nodes. There are ways to sort of obfuscate whether or not you're running a node. It's estimated that I mean, there are some estimates that there are over 100,000 Bitcoin nodes spread out around the world.
Wow.
Every single copy of those has that complete list of transactions of, this wallet sent this amount of Bitcoin to this wallet. Now,
Yeah.
the wallet addresses, that's why we say it's pseudonymous, right? Because I can have a wallet address that you may not have any idea that it's my wallet address. There are ways to like de-obfuscate that though. Like for instance, if I send money to my Coinbase account, because Coinbase knows who I am, because they have to abide by know your customer laws,
Yep.
thanks to the government, they have like a scan of my ID and a picture of me holding it next to my face. So like they know who I am. If I transfer money from a wallet to my Coinbase account, it doesn't necessarily prove that I owned that wallet, but we can say that it's related, right?
Sure.
And if I wanted to see where the money from that wallet came from, all I have to do is you can go, if you type in, go to Google and type in Bitcoin Block Explorer, there are websites where you can search the entire blockchain. So you can take a transaction
Wow.
ID, you can take a wallet address, and punch it into this website, and it'll show you. I mean, you can look at the entire history. I actually had a job earlier this year, very
That's
briefly. I
crazy.
worked for a company called CipherTrace. That's their entire business model. They actually do Bitcoin analytics and forensics. They work with governments, law enforcement,
Wow.
private entities to track funds on the blockchain. Like at one point, able to find out who is associated with a wallet, you can actually see everything. Now, again, there are ways to obfuscate that. There's like coin mixing. There's like
Wow.
Whirlpool. There are a few different ways that you can kind of obfuscate those trails. But if you're not doing any of that stuff, and you send money from your Coinbase account to Al Qaeda, you're gonna get busted for that. Like that's a very that's an easy thing to work out. So
Yeah.
Bitcoin is not anonymous, but it does. So how it can be anonymous though? Let's say that I don't use any of those exchange services, and
Yep.
let's say that I just download a wallet app on my phone and create a Bitcoin wallet. That is effectively anonymous as long as you don't do anything to link it with your real identity. So a few areas where that might come in handy. I can't even really think of a specific company right now because there have been so many, but think about all the companies that you've heard about that have had credit card data breached, right?
Hmm.
So you do business with a company, you give them your credit card, whether it's for a one-time
Right.
transaction or recurring or whatever, but you give them your credit card number, they keep that credit card number on file, and at that point you are essentially trusting that they are going
Yeah.
to be a good steward of that information. Unfortunately, as history has proven, many times that does not happen. Unfortunately, once that information is out, it's sort of like the same thing as
Kind of
earlier.
hooped.
The cat's out of the bag, right? You can't undo it once it's on the internet. And so Bitcoin allows though for a system where, like a good example, I was when I lived in Portland for the last 2 years that I lived there, I was a member of a
Mhm.
makerspace. I don't know if you're
Yep.
familiar with the makerspace concept. You go in and use,
Kind of like
3D
engineer
printers.
your own things and test it
Yeah,
out.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. You got like vinyl cutters,
Sweet.
laser printers, or laser cutters, 3D
Yeah.
printers. So I paid $40 a month
Yeah.
for that membership. But I did not want to set up a recurring payment on a credit card. I don't like those. I try to avoid them if I can.
Yep.
Um,
100%.
And fortunately, the owner of Control H, the makerspace in Portland, John, the owner, was very open to accepting Bitcoin. And
Mm.
so it allows for, so like, I guess you could think of it as like push versus pull, right? Like the traditional payment model for a recurring system, I give you my credit card and you pull the payment from me every month, right? Now that presents all kinds of challenges. Like I had to deal with something with Equifax earlier this year where I signed up with like credit monitoring for them, and then I canceled it during the free trial, and then they kept
Yep.
billing me. It was a huge hassle, man. I had to contact the freaking I had to contact like my state government because like they
Wow.
kept billing me and wouldn't stop. And so I basically contacted like I don't remember the name. It's like the I contacted like the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. I contacted like several regulatory agencies, and finally after doing that, I was able to get Equifax to stop billing my
Zoom.
credit card every month for this like
Yep.
$25 a month. Before that though, every time they'd bill it, I'd have to log into American Express, fill out a dispute with them, go through this whole
Zoom.
rigmarole, right? And I mean the whole process, it was like a 2 or 3 month long process where, you know, they just kept billing me this even
Zoom.
though I had already canceled it until they
Yeah.
finally got their stuff together. That could literally never happen in Bitcoin because instead of a pull model where you're pulling the money from me, I am the only one that can spend money out of my Bitcoin wallet. You can't just be like, if you have my Bitcoin wallet address, you can't do
Zoom.
with it except see how much money I have, how much Bitcoin I have in that specific wallet address.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like with a credit card. Once you have that details, then you can just take money all you want.
Yep.
And then, I mean, it's, you know, up to the credit limit, obviously.
Yeah.
That's a huge game changer, man. Like,
That is.
I mean, also, you know, there's no personal data that's associated with that, right? Like when you have my credit
Other than
card,
that one picture for that company, eh?
you know my name, you know my credit card number, you know my zip code, you might
Yeah.
even know my home address, right? Like, because sometimes they not only require a zip code, but they require your full billing
Yep.
address. So it's like multiple pieces of PII that get included with that. It's not
Yeah.
just a credit card number. It's like part of your identity, and that's
Yeah.
why I mean it's one of the reasons why we're dealing with so many issues with identity theft, because there
Yeah.
are all these data points for all these people, and they're all just out there waiting to be, you know, breached by somebody who then sells them on the dark net. And so
Yeah. It's
Bitcoin
crazy.
completely fixes that problem.
It does.
Uh,
Dan, before we keep going, there's a lot of
Yeah.
points I want to just add on. So, you know, you were mentioning earlier that there are some Bitcoin wallets, or I don't know if that was a correct term, but that actually have you take the picture with your identity card. Wouldn't that be, even with that, that's probably a little bit less of a compromise. Is that correct? Compared to going through a credit card and having every single piece of data and having it open.
yeah, I mean, I guess it depends, right? If you're talking about for the purposes of identity theft, I mean, like,
Mm.
you know, there's a picture of me on and exchange, by the way, would be the proper word. So
Mm.
uh, on an exchange, you have a Bitcoin wallet, right?
Mhm.
But a Bitcoin wallet is just basically it's a cryptographically secured store for the credentials that allow you to access your Bitcoin. It's complicated, right? Your
Yep.
wallet is not actually holding any Bitcoin.
Yeah.
As weird as it sounds, your wallet is holding the private keys that allow you to move that Bitcoin. It's which
Hmm.
is kind of a minor distinction, but anyway, and an exchange is a service that like Coinbase is an exchange. Most exchanges also offer wallets. Well, I would say all exchanges also offer wallets because you have to have some way to store the Bitcoin that you
Sure.
purchase. But the primary point of Coinbase, at least to me, I don't use Coinbase to store any Bitcoin. I just use it to buy Bitcoin. And then as soon as I can move it off the platform into a wallet that I control, and when I say control, we're talking about, again, the private keys, right? Because like on a
Yep.
Coinbase wallet, you don't have any way to access the private keys for that wallet. Coinbase controls them.
Sure.
On like a hardware wallet or like a software wallet that you'd run on your phone or your computer, like I have Wasabi wallet on my computer. That's a software wallet. I
Right.
control the keys to that though. There's like a file on my computer that contains the cryptographic private key that allows me to access my wallet.
Interesting.
And so because I am the only one that has that, nobody on earth, like if I kept money in Coinbase, I don't think they would do this because they're a reputable company, right? They could just take it if they wanted to. Or maybe, I mean, let's say the government comes to them and says, hey, you know, we want you to lock these funds because we think this guy is money laundering.
Or a terrorist or
I
something.
mean,
Yeah.
whether or not that's true, right? Like, unfortunately, I think, and this is probably a broader discussion, but, you know, you ask about like the benefits of Bitcoin. I think that, and it goes way beyond our lives, right? Like, I mean, this is going back like decades, maybe even hundreds of years, but like money has been weaponized, man. Look at the economic embargoes that the United States has levied on Cuba, Iran, Russia, North Korea.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, do I like any of those governments? No, absolutely not. But at the end of the day, the financial system, I don't think should be used as a weapon, and it absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
The reason it's used as a weapon is because they can. I mean, the United States, the US dollar is the global reserve currency. We have an immense amount of power that comes along with that.
Sure.
I think that, it kind of goes hand in hand with the military might. I don't know that we would have such a strong military in this country if we didn't have the status that we have as the global reserve currency, because everybody in the world right now anyway wants US dollars. I don't know that that'll always be that way.
Yeah.
And I feel like that, especially as somebody who has personally been frozen out of the financial system, granted for a limited amount of time, thankfully, but I've been there, I've lived that life, and it sucks.
Yeah.
And the idea that there is literally no way, you cannot stop somebody from making a Bitcoin wallet. You don't even need access to the internet. Like I have a hardware wallet here. It's called a cold card, that you can generate a Bitcoin wallet using dice. You roll dice and write down the numbers, and those numbers are then used to crunch your private key. You do not need to be connected to the internet at all. Nobody can stop me from doing that. I mean, the only way you could stop me would be to kill me or to steal the hardware wallet. And even then, even if you stole the hardware wallet, there are still ways. I mean, it's just, there are programs that you can download unless you destroy every computer in the world and every mobile phone.
The whole network. Yeah. Man, that's insane.
There is no way to freeze somebody out of the Bitcoin network. Now, there are ways to freeze them out of these centralized exchanges, right? Like Coinbase can close your account. But Coinbase isn't Bitcoin. Coinbase is just a third-party actor that is operating on the Bitcoin network. The actual Bitcoin protocol network itself, there's no way to stop anybody from using it. And that, I mean, I don't think words can even really convey how powerful that is. I think only history will convey. I think it's one of those things that if you would ask somebody in the 80s to like, I mean, even the 90s, man, like
Zoom.
What was it? Paul Krugman is sort of well known to this day as he's like universally derided for his comment in the late 90s that the internet will have no more economic impact than the fax machine. I don't know that I've ever heard a more wrong prediction in my lifetime. And like, there are people that thought that about the internet as late as the 90s, man. So like, when I hear people naysaying Bitcoin, I just kind of chuckle. I mean, I'll be happy to try and talk to people about why I think it's important. And I'm always down to like debate with people and change their minds.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I mean, you can't force somebody to do anything. I have a feeling though that, you hear people talk about like, oh man, I wish I had bought Bitcoin when it was, $1, $20, $200,
or like a thousandth of a cent.
I guarantee you, my friend, 10 years from now, there are going to be people that are saying, man, I wish I had bought Bitcoin at 20K in 2020. I guarantee it.
I agree.
If I were a betting man, I would bet money on it, but I'm not a betting man. I'd rather spend that money on Bitcoin. So,
well, I mean, you're showing that you are a betting man, right? Because you're putting that money down on Bitcoin, right? So, like your belief is there for sure.
Yeah. I think like I don't consider myself a very betting person, just for the record. We have we live by. I guess
belief would be a better word.
Maybe. I mean, we live by a Native American reservation here. Right. And so they have a casino, and we actually go there, I'd say probably about once a month. We normally go just for food, though. They have amazing food. But every so often, my wife and I'll take like $20 each, and we'll play the slots, like, yep. I don't really gamble though, man. I don't consider myself a betting guy. I think I probably bought maybe 10 lottery tickets in my entire lifetime, just sort of as a, like, just a lark. So I don't consider myself highly, like a highly risky person in that regard. I will say though, that I think like, yes, to some sense it is belief, but then also, man, I think there comes a certain point where if you've been in this space long enough, it goes beyond belief to just like personal lived experience. I mean, like I said, I've seen Bitcoin go from $200 to $20,000. I've seen it go 100x within my time involved. And then I've seen it go I've seen it drop back down to below $4,000 and then go back up to that previous high. And I am absolutely convinced that it will exceed that previous high in 2021.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I would agree that there's some degree of belief there, but it's like, I would say it's a mix of like belief plus just, I think 6 years ago, it would have been 100% belief. Absolutely. Like when I was buying any Bitcoin like 5-6 years ago, 100% belief. I'd say at this point, it's at least a 50-50 split of just like, I believe it's going to go higher, but I've also seen just like
The
the
history of it.
crazy price action that it's done.
Yeah.
Now, I want to point out too, I always like to call out when we're talking about Bitcoin price. I mean, I've been in the space long enough and I've tried to learn a lot about it. At this point, I feel really confident in saying that if you are willing to take the time to learn about Bitcoin, the price is like the least interesting thing about it.
Really?
Yeah, I've made money. Sure, yeah, I've made money. It's great. Like whatever, money's awesome. I especially love that with Bitcoin. I feel like that, of all the ways in the world to make money, I feel like that with Bitcoin, there's like maybe a little less exploitation, right? I'm not exploiting anybody's labor to make any money, or
True.
I'm not like fooling anybody or doing anything shady, or like all I'm doing is buying Bitcoin that's created by miners crunching numbers. Like I
Yeah.
guess you could argue that there's maybe an environmental impact. I think even
Yep.
that is a little overblown. I've seen a lot of stuff talking about like the energy footprint that's used by the Bitcoin mining network, but what I think a lot of those articles fail to take into account is that there is a huge competition among Bitcoin miners to find the cheapest, most efficient power available,
That's true.
which tends to be renewable energy. So, like,
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, even compare it to what you're working against, right? Like a typical bank, they still have computers,
sure.
they still have manpower, they still have to have chairs, they have to have buildings, they have their own
Or
ways.
gold. I mean, let's talk about gold, man. Like, moving $1 billion worth of gold versus $1 billion worth of Bitcoin,
Which
easy
one's easier?
choice.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not even a competition, man. That's like
absolutely.
asking, who's going to win in this race between my Bugatti Veyron and my 12-speed mountain bike.
Yeah. No, that's very true. So, Dan, let me kind of bring you back a little bit. You were mentioning earlier that the government may have access to stop your Bitcoin, but then after you're mentioning that they kind of don't. And I think I missed that connection. Do you mind kind of just talking a little bit about that?
Sure. So like the real strength of Bitcoin, in my opinion, is this decentralization, right? There is no central authority. There's nobody for the government to shut down. That's by
Right.
design, by the way. Like if you look at the history of Satoshi Nakamoto, which is
Yeah.
the pseudonym
Yeah.
of the person or group,
Lots of
I believe it was
documentaries on them too.
I believe it was an individual. I'm
Yeah.
strongly of the opinion that it was one guy.
Yeah.
I think that this was the epitome of his life's work.
Yeah.
Like I think that I think he spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think he also spent a lot of time learning about the history of money in this country. And the reason that I say that is because so when Satoshi registered Bitcoin.org, he
Mm.
used a service to register it that is fully anonymous. Like I want to say it's called Anonymous Speech is the name of the website,
Mm.
but basically, so like you can use private whois when you register a website, but the
Yeah.
registrar that you register the site with, they still
They
know
still
who
have
you
your
are,
ex.
right? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So
I didn't even think about that.
this service, Anonymous Speech, I don't know if they still even operate, but what they used to do is you could send them 15, $20 in the mail in cash, and then they register the website for you. And that's the service that he used to register this website. Like he put so much thought from the very beginning into making sure that nobody would ever find out who he was. And the
Yeah.
reason that he did that, if you're not familiar with this, I encourage you to look it up. And I would encourage the same for all of your listeners. Go to Google and type in Liberty, Liberty dollar alternate currency. Make sure to do alternate currency on the end because there's a Liberty dollar that's like a US minted coin, but
Yeah.
you're specifically looking for the alternate currency. And it is the Liberty dollar is a private currency that was created here in the States. It was I believe it was I'm not super familiar with it because I was never involved, but it's my understanding that it was basically like a gold-backed private currency.
Mm.
And the government shut them down hard. Not only did they shut them down, they confiscated all their money. And
Wow.
that's by the way, that's not the first time that the government has done something like that. right? Like, I mean, first of all, we have a huge issue in this country of civil forfeiture, right? Where the government will just come in and say, hey, we think you're doing a bad thing. We think you're, dealing drugs, laundering money,
Hmm.
whatever, and so we're just gonna take that all. We're gonna take all your money. And there are
Yeah.
numerous stories about that, man. Type in like civil forfeiture US in the States. There was a story, I think, last year about a guy who was flying, within the states, right? Like, we're not even talking about leaving the country. We're talking about just
Yeah.
staying in America, but flying from one state to another. Went through TSA went through airport security with like, I don't even remember. It was like 20, 30, 40,000 bucks,
Yep.
something like that. Not, I mean, like a decent amount of money, but like certainly not like, I mean, when I think of people laundering money, I'm thinking like millions of bucks type of thing.
Yep.
This guy went through with basically his life savings in cash, and the government took it from him.
Yeah.
And at that point, unfortunately, it sort of goes against like the well established or sort of well understood precept in this country of innocent until proven guilty, right? Because what the government is essentially doing is they're saying, we think you're guilty, so we're going to take this money,
Yep.
and now it's up to you to prove that you're
Yep.
innocent, which, by the way, that requires a lawyer, which, by the way, requires
Cost
money,
money.
which, by the way, you have none of now because we
Yeah.
stole it all from you. So it's sort of an interesting catch 22, right? It's like cutting somebody's leg off and then thinking
Zoom.
about how they, how their time in the quarter mile went down.
Yep.
You know, and I mean, it is absolutely mind-boggling that we allow that kind of to
Zoom.
happen, but that's where we are as a country. If you go
Yeah.
back even further, though, if you go back to I think it was I can't remember if it was in the 30s or the 40s. I want to say it was called Executive Order 6133. Basically, if you
Okay.
just go to Google and type in FDR gold confiscation, you'll find all
Right.
kinds of stuff written about how, the U.S. government basically put out an executive order saying all private citizens must turn in their gold. And the penalty, if you failed to comply, the penalty was like $10,000 fine, which, I mean, again, I don't even know what that would be in today's money, like some insane amount of money, I'm sure, and like time in prison. And
Yeah.
so, there are plenty of plenty of precedents in
Yeah.
this country of the government just outright robbing from people. And properly, so to go back to your question, okay, so here's where the danger comes in, right? Bitcoin itself is decentralized. There's no Bitcoin company or offices that the government can raid. There's no one Bitcoin central
Hmm.
server that the governments can shut down. I mean, technically, Bitcoin Core's code is hosted on GitHub, so I guess, like, it would cause some issues, we'll say, if the government came into GitHub and forced them to shut down the Bitcoin Core repo. However, that would be very temporary, right? First of all, the existing Bitcoin network, like the software, all that GitHub is the repository for the software if you want to
Yeah.
install it. If you already have it running, it's like it would have zero impact on the existing Bitcoin network, and it would have zero long-term impact, because I'm sure that if that were to happen, the obvious response would be to build a decentralized GitHub to host Bitcoin Core code. And that
Yeah.
would absolutely be done very quickly. I'm certain of it. So I think, because of that, I doubt that the government would even go that route, because what's the point? Like, at best, you'd be giving it a paper cut, right? And you're just going to put a band-aid on it and go on with your life.
And you're also going
Now,
to create that fury for
well,
the
you
users.
get a bit of a Streisand effect there, right? Like, I think that, I think the smartest thing for the government to do would just be to ignore Bitcoin. I think that if they try to regulate it, first of all, apparently in 2018, Trump told Mnuchin that I want you to stop Bitcoin. This was like 2 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, and you know what Mnuchin said?
What do you say?
Said we can't. I mean, like, that's the thing. They could deal a serious blow to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They could probably deal numerous serious blows to Bitcoin that would set it back by years. It
Yeah.
would not destroy it, though. I am confident at this point that, I mean, so here's the only scenario. There are only two scenarios, actually, that I can see Bitcoin completely failing.
Mm.
Yeah, we'll say two, and then I'll say two and a half, and I'll say what the half one is. So the first one is complete and utter apocalyptic breakdown of society, where, I mean, we're talking like zombie apocalypse, global EMP from like a massive solar flare, so,
Yeah.
something that throws the entire planet all at once back into the Stone Age. That's one scenario. Another scenario, and even this, I don't know that it would completely kill it, but another scenario that could possibly kill Bitcoin would be every government, and I mean every government on the entire planet, agreeing to cooperate to shut down every Bitcoin miner they can find, every third party Bitcoin centralized service they can find, and arrest every Bitcoin holder that they can find. If
which is
every government on
so
earth
much.
agreed to do those things and cooperated together to accomplish them, then I think that could kill Bitcoin. Now, that would
Wow.
require a degree of collusion, of friendship, of common goal
Synchronization.
between countries that we have never before seen in
Yeah.
all of human history. And so the likelihood of that happening, I would be I would think that it's more likely that aliens are going to land on the White House, on the south lawn of the White House. Like I just don't see that happening.
Yeah.
Now, two and a half, the other scenario that I think could maybe kill Bitcoin would be some kind of serious technical flaw in
Hmm.
the protocol itself. Even that though, I mean, there was a bug. So I think it's important to note that in 12 years of Bitcoin's history, there has not been a single bug that resulted in funds being stolen from somebody else. Right?
Hmm.
Every Bitcoin hack that you've heard about, every time you've heard about X number of Bitcoins were stolen, every single one of those instances has been a centralized third-party exchange. Which, by the way, to quickly answer the question you asked earlier, that's what goes back to how could the government shut down your Bitcoin transaction if you're using like Coinbase or some kind of centralized exchange? The
Yeah.
government could come in and say, "Hey, stop that person from transacting, freeze their funds." In that scenario, again, right? Because going back to what we talked about earlier, because in that scenario, Coinbase would be the one who holds the private keys.
Yep.
Because they hold the private keys, they control what happens with that money.
So
If
so is
you're
that
using
sorry to cut you off, Dan. So is that why you're mentioning to go on to like your own local hardware disk?
That's yeah, I mean that's one reason. I mean there are a few reasons, right? Like but that's I'd say a big one. I mean there's a saying in the space, it's in NYC is the abbreviation. Stands for not your keys, not your coin. I also like to
Hmm.
call it not your keys, not your condo, right? Because that's a better way to I mean that's the reason I say not your keys, not your condo is because I think that's a little more of like a
Not your house.
more people can relate to that, right? Like if you don't
Yeah.
have the keys to the condo, that's not your condo.
Yeah.
And if you've made
I like that better.
copies of that, if you've made copies of that key and given it to other people, or if you give that key to somebody else,
That's
well,
such a good analogy.
what's that saying? Possession is 9/10 of of ownership. So like, I mean, that's I think why it's the whole point of Bitcoin, man. Like, I mean, so going back, it's like Satoshi. The reason I mentioned gold confiscation, by the way, I forgot to tie that all together. Satoshi picked when he registered for a forum account on bitcointalk.com, the birth date that he chose was the date that that executive order was released, the day, not the year. So it was like April whatever was the day that he picked, but then the year that he picked was 1971,
Hmm.
which I don't know if you know the significance of that. I think it was
No.
71, it might be 72, but that was when Nixon finally fully removed the US from the gold standard. So like
Huh.
Satoshi,
Zoom.
I mean, maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's a coincidence that maybe that really
Never
is
know.
his birthday, but I don't think so. The guy was very smart, and he clearly knew what he was doing, and he clearly knew the history of previous attempts of people trying to do similar things to create an alternative financial system. He knew that would be bringing some heat down on him potentially. In fact, he stepped away from the Bitcoin project altogether when one of the other developers, right? Because the project had grown at that point, there were several
Sure.
developers who were working with it. One of the developers accepted an invitation to speak at the CIA about Bitcoin. The
Oh
CIA wanted
man.
to ask him questions about Bitcoin. And it wasn't immediately after that, but like within a few weeks after that, Satoshi had that was his last post. Like
Well, I mean, he saw the
within
history, right?
right, and I think I think he kind of knew that maybe that I think there's a lot of interest in finding out who he is, and I hope that we never do.
Yeah. And so for those of us who don't know, it's Bitcoin, the founder Satoshi, he's anonymous. And not the cyber internet group that's done a lot of advocacy work, but like no one knows who he is. And keep in mind, like the people that are in Bitcoin usually have a lot more advanced technical skills compared to the lay public. So if they can't find them, realistically, no one can. And, just the fact that he made this decentralized network, it's like, it's incredible. And, just kind of talking about previous themes that we were talking about here, Dan, money is power. But if there's a way to distribute money to the whole world, that power goes away. And I think maybe I'm speculating here, but maybe that's why Trump wanted to shut it down, because, he's a powerful person. He's the president of the free world, quote unquote. And, it's
for another 45
one
days.
Way.
Just
So 5 more days, is that it?
I said it's for another 45 days.
Okay, 45 days, yeah. And then we got Biden coming in. And, it's just one way to keep control on people. And, control to some degree, I think, is necessary. But I think just in the past couple of years, there's been a lot of distrust. I mean, you're mentioning that example with police coming in and taking over your possessions for, I think, and I actually saw a documentary and I was kind of blown away when I heard it was in Washington as well. There was an example where an individual couple who were living in a state, I believe it was Washington, maybe California, but the state allows consumption of marijuana and it allows growth of marijuana. And what they end up finding out is that, the cops came through, they saw like maybe a little bit of marijuana, just, personal consumption amount, but they took away their whole property just for that. And then they were saying, we think you're growing it or something. And, I was watching this and like, I don't even know what to think. I was just watching this and it hit me so deeply, and I'm not even getting my property taken away. And, I think in Canada, it's a little bit more, I don't know about the financial law specifically, but, this kind of stuff is not even heard about, and I don't know if it's possible. And maybe I just haven't had that experience, and I'm very thankful for it.
Dude, it's barely talked about here. I mean, it like this that happens here in this country barely gets talked about. It's like our media, they don't spend a lot of time talking about that kind of stuff. It's like
it's crazy.
If you seek it out, right? Like I mean, I'm not a libertarian myself, but like I have some libertarian leanings, I guess you could say. Like I am a big advocate for like I'm a big advocate for just being left alone, unless I'm infringing on somebody else's rights. I guess you could call that libertarian.
Yeah.
And not so much now, but I would say definitely 7 years ago when I first got into Bitcoin, it was very heavily dominated by libertarian-minded people like that, and there still is a pretty big presence today. Right. I think just because of what Bitcoin represents, right? Like I think the best description that I've heard of Bitcoin is that it is the first. Let me find a good way to phrase this. It is the, at least as far as I know, it is the only way to really achieve true financial sovereignty, right? Like the idea that like only I control this money. I mean, you could kind of do it with gold. Like I have a little bit of gold. I don't knock precious metals. I mean, I have a little bit of gold. I have a little bit of silver.
Sure, diversified.
Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, if there's ever an emergency situation where we need to get the hell out of like we've talked about it, man. We've talked about, if it goes bad, we were 10 minutes from the Canadian border, like if things ever get bad, go up there and try and claim, refugee status or something. At that point, it's like I would feel a lot more comfortable traveling with my seed phrase, right? Because my hardware wallet, I don't even need the physical wallet. I mean, ideally, I would take it with me if I could. But I have a 24-word seed phrase that I can use to restore that wallet. And I don't even need the same device, by the way. I can use a different device. It's a standard. It's like a standardized thing, right? So those same 24 words I can use to restore my Bitcoin wallet on any wallet that supports that it's called BIP38 standard. BIP38 stands for Bitcoin Improvement Protocol, or Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. And so BIP38 was an improvement proposal to Bitcoin that said, hey, backing up wallets is really hard. What we should do, because prior to seed words, you used to have to write down, it was like a super long string of like random alphanumeric shit, right? The BIP38 protocol basically is a list of like, I think it's like a list of like 1,000 to 2,000 words, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you got to realize when you're making 24 combinations of those, I don't remember exactly what the exponential number is, but it's something like the number of possibilities. It's like more than the number of grains of sand on the planet Earth. Like it's insane that it would be impossible to guess. It would take billions of years for the fastest computers in the world to guess, your private seed phrase. And
Yeah.
so I can take that seed phrase, I can write it down on paper, I can etch it on the metal, I could memorize it, which I don't really recommend. I have
Zoom.
memory, but if you have a great memory, sure. I mean, if it's just maybe for something like going across the border, properly secured, my Bitcoin can never be taken from me. The worst that could ever happen, right? The worst that could ever happen is that somebody kills me and then my Bitcoin is gone forever. Or it's at least inaccessible forever. It's not really gone, right? It still exists, but it's like locked.
Yeah.
And in
No one
fact,
has access.
there are some estimates that as many as like 2 to 3 million Bitcoin, which keep in mind there's only 18.5 million Bitcoin in existence right now in general, and there will only ever be at most 21 million, and that won't happen until like 2140, right?
Yep.
So we're talking about like possibly as much as 10 to 20% of the existing Bitcoin market, existing Bitcoin that's out there is considered lost, meaning that people have died, or like you may have read a couple of years ago there was a story about a guy in, like, I think it was England. He threw away an old desktop that on the hard drive he had like thousands of Bitcoins that he mined. And so the article that I read talks about how he likes to go to he'll like go to the dump and basically dig through garbage trying to find his old computer because it's worth like millions of dollars now.
Jesus.
So, I mean, and now do I want somebody to kill me and my Bitcoin be lost forever? No. But I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of times when people steal money from you, especially if we're talking about like warlords and stuff, they're going to kill you anyway. So it's like, hey, if I get to choose, if I'm going to be dead either way, right? And I get to choose, like, I'm going to be dead and then they have my money, or I'm going to be dead and they don't get
Zoom.
Guess which one I'm going to pick?
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that is, money is a motivator for some of these unfortunate actions, but now if that gets removed, that's another safety measure,
Sure. And I will say, like, one danger, or one thing I've noticed, there are a lot of people in the Bitcoin community. I don't know if it was you that said this in one of the emails that we exchanged, or if it was somebody else, because I've had a few conversations about Bitcoin lately, but somebody made some kind of comment about how like some Bitcoiners view Bitcoin as like the savior of humanity or something like that. And that's true. There are some people that think that Bitcoin is going to like solve all the world's problems, right? Like, I definitely am not of that mind. I mean, I'm a little bit of a pessimist, I guess, or I guess maybe I would probably call it a realist. I mean, just I've lived long enough and I've interacted with enough people to know that there are some people that are just
Zoom,
like, for whatever reason, maybe they're not deep down, right? Like maybe they're just really conflicted about
or something.
And it's like, fixing the money problem, fixing our monetary system isn't going to just magically make everybody like not be in
Zoom.
Like there's still going to be evil people. There's still going to be people out there that like try to exploit people, right? I do think though that a few of the things that Bitcoin I think could potentially really disrupt. I mean, one big obvious one to me, and it would be very hard to get them to do this, but I think it absolutely needs to happen. All government money transfers should be on the Bitcoin blockchain. And the reason why goes back to what we were talking about earlier, because it's all public, right? And I think so the government should be forced to use Bitcoin, and they should be forced to disclose every wallet that they have, right? So we know every wallet that the government owns, and we can see every single transfer of funds, right? I feel like that would fix a lot of things right now, just with waste in our government, because there's so much money that just disappears into a black hole. I mean, hell, the day before 9/11, there was September 10th, 2001, there was a report that came out that there was like $9 trillion that the Pentagon couldn't account for, or something. I might have been, I don't remember. Now I got to look it up because I'm curious. Yeah, it's like, my bad. My bad. It was only $2.3 trillion.
Oh man.
So
you're gonna get some angry viewers for that one, Dan.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
No, I'm bugging you.
That's pocket change, man. Pocket change.
Yeah. Man, it's just a crazy concept, and it's nice talking to someone who actually knows a lot more about Bitcoin and, just the whole everything about it. It's I'm just like a regular person who doesn't know too much, heard a little about mining, thought about mining, and then tried to find out how to do it. And I'm just like, Yeah, I thought I was smart enough, but probably not.
So with mining, a couple of things about mining real quick. So first of all, you cannot mine Bitcoin right in today's technology and the amount of hash power on the Bitcoin network. You
Hmm.
cannot mine it with a computer. Doesn't matter. You could have
Interesting.
like
That's
you could have
done,
like
eh?
the most baller gaming rig with like a, I'm not a gamer, so I'm probably gonna get this wrong. What is it? The GTX 1080 or whatever, like the,
Yeah.
the like top of the line. That's probably not even top of the line anymore. You can tell how out of touch I am with that stuff. But yeah, my point is, you could build a $10,000 gaming rig with like the most badass hardware that's on the market,
Yep.
and it's not going to mine Bitcoin. So
Just done
starting
now.
a few years ago, there were specialized mining equipment processors made. They're called ASICs,
Hmm.
and they're purpose built to basically mine Bitcoin, or it's not even really to mine Bitcoin, but they're purpose built for the specific algorithm that it's used. I'm not a big expert in mining. I don't know if you can tell, but anyway, the key
More than
takeaway
me.
though, the key takeaway is that unless you're willing to invest like thousands of dollars in these ASICs, it's really not even worth mining. And especially like you'll see these like cloud mining things where they're like, give us money and we'll mine for you in our data center. Those are all scams, man. Like you're not. I mean, I shouldn't say
It,
scams. Like they're not really scams. Some of them are legit in the sense that you will actually get cryptocurrency back.
probably
However,
less though.
it's minor, man. Like
Yep.
in my experience, and I won't say that this is true all the time, just because then numbers can swing around or whatever. But in the 7 years that I've been involved in Bitcoin, I found that the best way to get Bitcoin is just to buy it, man. Like whatever money you were going to spend on mining, like buying equipment or whatever, spend that 10 grand instead of
Yeah.
instead of buying 10 grand worth of ASICs, you want to buy 10 grand worth of Bitcoin and just hang on to it. And you can thank me in a couple of years.
No, absolutely. I think back when I was actually really considering this, it was probably, I don't even know, 20 is
You
somewhere between 2010 to 2014.
Yeah, you could
So
definitely mine. Yeah, sure. Back then, I mean, back
yeah,
in 2010, you could mine on a laptop. Didn't even need a dedicated
yeah,
graphics card. You could do
yeah,
CPU mining, and then for a couple of years, it was like you needed a GPU. You needed like a,
yeah,
a pretty solid GPU. And then since probably since like 2015, I think is when the first ASICs hit the market. They are,
yeah,
because they're purpose built. They are so much more efficient at what
yeah.
they do that it doesn't make
You
sense
can't
to use
compete.
anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, okay, that is some awesome knowledge. I wanna kind of get deep in this. Like, tell me about. I want you to tell me two things. Okay, what's
sure.
the scariest thing that you learned about Bitcoin? And I want you to tell me about like what is one of the coolest experiences you can have with Bitcoin that the layperson just wouldn't understand.
Hmm.
Deep
Okay,
questions.
for the second one, when you say experience, you mean like something that you can spend Bitcoin on, or do you mean just
Yeah.
like part
Or
of?
just something
Okay,
cool that you've learned about it that, would be something that would be interesting to our viewers and then be like,
yeah, yeah,
wow,
yeah. So
I'll try it
scariest
out.
thing and coolest thing, right? So
Yeah.
basically two questions. Okay, so I'll start with the scariest thing. We'll do them in order. I think the scariest thing is just like how new it all is, right? Like, I mean, it's even 12 years in, it's unproven. I mean, especially when we're talking about, the US dollar, it's like a couple hundred years old. Gold, we've used gold for thousands of years. Like
Yep.
the earliest recorded history that we have, it's like people were interested in gold because it looks cool, it's shiny, and it never stops being shiny.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's cool. You know, compared to those, I mean, even compared to the US dollar, it's just like it's so unproven, and
Mm.
it's so foreign compared to
Yeah.
like, it's different than anything else that people have ever used. And so, and I think because it is dealing with money, right? Especially now, I think like 10 years ago, it's like nobody really considered Bitcoin valuable. 10 years ago, it was pennies,
Mm.
you know. But now, it's substantial. I mean, I would say even that at this point, most, and this is my suspicion, I don't have any hard data on this, but I think that most people in my country probably would not be able to buy a Bitcoin right now. Like, I don't think most people in America have, 19, 20 grand just sitting in their bank account that they could use to spend on
Oh
something.
yeah.
The vast majority of people in this country live paycheck to paycheck.
Yep.
I think the scariest thing to me about that is like, I went hard on Bitcoin like
Yep.
within these last 2 years, especially. Like I said, like I mentioned earlier, I when I left my job earlier this year to go work for CipherTrace, and I didn't end up working for them very long because they were not very prepared for COVID. So I got laid off about a month and a half into the job. But when I left and I'm now back at my original company, by the way. So when I left the company though, earlier this year, I cashed out my 401k. And this was before COVID had really hit, by the way. So they hadn't done, I guess as part of our relief package here, they did a thing where you can waive the penalty for your 401k withdrawal. And so I'm going to look into that, see if I can waive that 10%. But you get dinged with like a 10% early withdrawal fee for your 401k. And so I did that. And my 401k wasn't much, to be clear. I cashed out my 401k a few years ago when I got fired after trying to start a union. I cashed that out just so that I could, keep paying my rent and stuff. And so I had only had a few years of savings in my current 401k when I cashed it out. So it wasn't much. It was like, I think it was like $8,000, something like that, after the penalties and everything. But I put it all into, well, not all. I put most of it into Bitcoin. I put like $7,000 into Bitcoin, and then I spent like $1,000 on silver and gold. Yep. Which hilariously, I'm down on both the silver and the gold, but I'm way up on the Bitcoin. Yep. So I kind of regret that, but whatever. I'd like
$1,000.
Yeah, whatever. It's not a big deal.
You don't know what happens tomorrow.
So what's scary to me about that is, like, when I said earlier, if I was talking to like a more like traditional investor, I would say, look, at this point, you've got massive companies that are getting into the space. I think that it would be unwise to not have some kind of allocation, even if it's a small one, like I mentioned earlier, like 1 to 5%.
Yep.
I think for me, I'm like 95% invested in Bitcoin. I have a little bit of precious metals. I own some stocks. I have a small 401k that I've been building back up since earlier this year.
Sure.
But the vast majority of my money right now is in Bitcoin. And in some ways that's great, because like, compare that to like a 401k, right? If I wanted to say get a loan against my 401k, that would actually take me, it's a bit of a process. You got to fill out paperwork, you're basically asking for fucking permission to get to your own money, right?
Yep.
If I want to spend my Bitcoin, man, I could do it while we're on this phone call. I could send you Bitcoin right now.
If you're feeling that way, man, feel free.
Actually, you know what? Do you want to do a little demonstration? I'll send you some Bitcoin. It won't be much, but we'll I'm going to show you the Lightning Network, which is a layer 2 protocol that allows for much faster transactions, right? Like the block time on the Bitcoin, the main Bitcoin network has approximately 10-minute block time. So new blocks are created about every 10 minutes on average.
Okay.
And so when you send a Bitcoin transaction, there's a chance, depending on what kind of fee you pick. If you pick a low fee, it might take a while. So let's say it takes 6 blocks before it actually gets included. That's an hour. And I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm at a coffee shop or something and I'm trying to buy a coffee,
that's a bit too
I don't
long.
want to wait for an hour before I can leave. I usually just want to get my coffee and leave. Or especially if it's like a drive-through. So the Lightning Network is a decentralized layer 2 protocol that allows for much faster remittances, like within seconds. And so there are a lot of different options for Lightning. Just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to recommend an app that's called Wallet of Satoshi. And you should be able to download that on either the iOS or Android Play stores.
Let's see. Let's try to get the internet working over here. Is there a way to send the money back automatically? Because I don't want to take your money as much as I appreciate it.
No, dude, keep it. I'm gonna send you about $1 worth of Bitcoin. I'm honestly not.
Are you sure?
So yeah, hang on to it.
It's gonna grow to 1,000, man.
I was gonna say, if it ever ends up being a substantial amount of money, and once the border opens back up, you can buy me dinner up in Vancouver.
Sounds good. Wallet of Satoshi. And is there
speaking of that, by the way, real quick, just a little anecdote.
Sure.
My wife has a little bit of Bitcoin as well. She's not nearly as into it as I am. Obviously, I'm a big freaking nerd. But her introduction to Bitcoin was very similar to mine. In fact, it was from the same person. We went out with my friend and his wife. The 4 of us, we all went out for dinner. And my wife was about to drop her credit card because she was picking up for she and I. And Patrick asked for the same thing. He said, "Hey, how would you feel about having us pay you in Bitcoin?" And same thing. It was like $25 worth at the time. that $25, dude, is worth it's worth like $700 now.
Jeez.
Like I was like, it might not be exact, but I mean, it's worth hundreds of dollars,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so like, it's it's funny to see that kind of stuff, man. And I will say, kind of to go back earlier and add on a little to the question you asked about like how has it changed.
Mhm.
It definitely makes me think more about like spending money, right? Like when I spend money now, I'm like, well, I could buy Bitcoin with that, and then it could be worth that $1 could be worth like 5, 10, 20 in the future, man. And so like, I will say that I still am a big gadget nerd. Like I buy dumb shit like this GoPro and stuff like that I don't really need, just for fun. Cause
Sure.
I'm into like, I'm into music, I'm into photography, videography. I got a bunch of hobbies and shit and they're all
Sure.
expensive. But I will say that over the last few years, I found myself spending less money frivolously because
Sure.
I have more of a savings mindset. I'm thinking that like longer term um, planning
Mindset.
is more forefront in my mind. So, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I forgot to answer your other question. I answered one question about what was scary, and I think
We'll,
what
we'll,
would be the
we'll go to
most,
that one real quick. I just want to
yeah,
kind of follow up on what you're
yeah,
mentioning.
yeah.
And, when you're mentioning that, Bitcoin caused you to think long term, I had a very similar experiences once I started going to stocks, which thanks to, I will give a shout out to Wealth Simple Trade. There are some things that you should look up on, so don't just go into it verbatim, but super easy to get started. And, it's kind of like Robinhood for the States, for Canada.
Oh,
And yeah,
nice.
yeah.
I
So,
love Robinhood. That's what I use Robinhood for my stocks, and I even have a little bit of Bitcoin on there, even though I don't
yeah,
really like them for Bitcoin. I had like $20 left of buying power in my
yeah,
Robinhood account, and I was like, there's no stock that I would want to buy for that. I messed around with penny stocks a few years ago. I did nothing but lose money, and so I was like, I'm just
right,
gonna throw that into Bitcoin. It's
right.
almost doubled since I did that. So
Jeez, wow,
yeah.
that's fantastic. But like it's what did I want to say? I wanted to say that once you go into these kind of things, that's what actually shows you about why you should save money. Because I'm not sure if I can speak for you, Dan, but like prior to me actually going to stocks, prior to me opening like a higher interest savings account that's just online and has great rates, when people told me it's like, oh man, don't worry about it. Oh, it's fine. It's money. That's how you get it. And once I actually went into this. I'm like, wow, no, I'm going to save my money because even if I'm making 2%, what's the word? Annually or whatever,
Compounding. Yeah.
compounding
Yeah.
interest, it adds up. And before you know it, like that's $20. And 20
Yep.
bucks might not seem like a lot, but I'm not even investing a lot. And that's like
Well,
a free meal.
you got to realize too, it's not just $20, right? Because that's the whole
That
point
20
of
bucks.
compounding.
Yep.
So
Keeps
so
going.
now you're getting so let's say you start with $100, right? You got 2% interest, and I know
Yep.
it's not actually $20 after a year, but let's just say it was. And so now you've got $120, and you're getting
Yep.
2% interest on that. And so it's like, yeah, it's I
It all
think
adds
one
up.
thing, I don't know much about Canadian culture. I have a few Canadian friends, and I watch some like you know Schitt's Creek. Those guys are Canadian, right? But like I will say that for American culture, we are very, very, and I'm assuming you guys are similar. Correct me if I'm wrong. We're very, very bad at delayed gratification, and it goes back to that like long term planning thing, right? Like we want what we want and we want it now. And I suffer
Yeah.
from that too, man. I'm impatient as hell. And when things don't go my way, sometimes I get kind of jerky about
Yeah.
it. And it's like, that's a bad attitude to have when it comes to money, especially
Mm-hmm.
because like what what you think might be like instant gratification, like I feel like that's how we get ourselves in trouble, right? Like, I mean, so many people in this country have a ton of debt. And the reason they have it is
Yep.
because they want the things that instead of saving for something, instead of saying like, I want this thing that costs 10 grand. So I'm going to save $1,000 a month for 10
Yep.
months and then I'm going to go get it. They say, well, I'm going to put it on my credit card and then I'm going to spend $1,000 a month for 10 months to pay
Exactly.
it off. The problem with that is that a lot of credit cards are like 20% interest,
Yeah.
and so you're not just paying that 10 grand. And it's like, yeah, I
And
won't
it's
say that I'm
crazy.
perfect about that, but I've been trying to get better.
For sure. And you don't have to be perfect, but as long as you actually even know this and you know that compounding is great for yourself and terrible if you have it on your credit card, it's huge. And I mean, like just something that I learned recently, which is kind of, not the best thing to admit, but like even I learned that interest adds on every day after you're past your grace period, every single day. And although it doesn't
Yeah.
show, it adds on every single day. So,
Yep.
just these little things can make a huge difference. And what's one thing that I wanted to mention? There's such a good anecdote I wanted to give. Not coming to the brain. So, let's talk about the positive experience that you've had with the Bitcoin experience, like the Bitcoin space.
Yeah, I mean, really just like that stuff that I mentioned earlier, man, being able to pay for like memberships and being able to pay like I, I want to mention, just because I know that there, and we've both said it, so I'm not trying to point fingers or anything, but I know that there is this perception of like, oh, Bitcoin is like drug money, right? People use it to buy drugs on the internet. I want to be clear that in 7 years being involved in this space, I have never once bought drugs with Bitcoin. I've bought a lot of stuff with Bitcoin. I've never spent it on anything illegal. I've bought stuff off of Newegg.com takes, Bitcoin. I've bought like Domino's Pizza using the Lightning Network with Bitcoin. I've bought like Starbucks gift cards with it that I then, treat my wife to like a latte or something, So like there are a lot of things that you can use Bitcoin for that aren't illegal. But I don't think people, realize that. Like there's not, because the perception right now is like, oh, drug dealer money. To me, that just implies like how early we are. That people don't get it, and that's okay,
Yep.
because it's new, it's untrusted. Like I mentioned earlier, because it involves money, people are usually like immediately skeptical, because why wouldn't you be? There are so many scammers out there, man, and not even just in Bitcoin, but just in general. Like, I mean, think about all I get them all the time. These, and not that they're scammers necessarily. I'm going to piss people off by saying this, I guess, but like those, you haven't heard from, like you're Facebook friends with somebody from high school that you haven't heard from for like 20 years, and then they send you a message and it's like
Zoom
sales pitch about their MLM.
Zoom.
Like, oh, check out my diet shakes or my stupid clothes, or it's like, I love that. Like, I don't do that.
Zoom.
Right? Maybe there are some Bitcoiners that do, but like I am not out there like cold messaging people about like, oh, check out Bitcoin. It's so
Zoom.
Cool, man. Like I have people reaching out to me though, especially lately, but really over the last years, I've had a lot of people reaching out asking me questions about Bitcoin, right? Like, what is it? What's it all about? Should I get into altcoins? The answer is no.
Really?
Like just oh, absolutely. Like
no Ethereum or nothing like that.
I mean, okay, I should say like
maybe the
I don't have a
unknown
crystal
ones.
ball, right? So I have no idea. I mean, it's entirely
that's
possible that Ethereum overtakes Bitcoin and I'll end up eating some crow on this. Personally, I don't see it happening. And here's why. First of all, if you look at there are a number of metrics that I look at that to me indicate like health of an overall project or network when we're talking about the cryptocurrency space. And every single one of those metrics, Bitcoin is far and away the best. I mean, to me, the most important thing is the decentralization, right? Like we talked about it earlier.
Yep.
I think that, and I don't think that we've even seen governments really try and step up. I do think that we may see, stronger pushback from governments as this industry or overall ecosystem grows in value, right? Like the total cryptocurrency market right now, I'm going to look it up because I want to quote it around. I'm going to say it's like 500 billion is my guess.
Oh.
It is let's see, the total crypto market cap. This is all cryptocurrencies that are tracked. I'm getting this data from coinmarketcap.com, is $568 billion. Now, of that, 355 is Bitcoin, right? So more than half of the overall value. And you got to realize we're talking about thousands of cryptocurrencies that exist. So
that's huge.
You basically got Bitcoin, number one, takes up over half of the total market cap of the complete cryptocurrency industry, and the other, 2,999 cryptos make up like the other 40%. So I think right there, that's your first indication maybe that it could be a fluke, right? It's absolutely possible that may change in the future. I will say though that has been the case. I mean, Bitcoin was the first sort of successful cryptocurrency, right? And then you had Litecoin and Ethereum. But I mean, never at any point have any of them even come close to supplanting Bitcoin as the top cryptocurrency. So just from a market cap perspective, I think there's a strong argument to be made that Bitcoin is number one, and it's going to take a lot. I mean, Ethereum's market cap would need to increase by, their market cap is $67 billion compared to Bitcoin's 355. So what is that? It's like, $290 billion that it would need to increase to even match it. That's not exceed. That's just that's equity, right? So now if we look beyond that, if you look at proof of work based cryptocurrencies, which is what Bitcoin is, that's how the mining network is secured. It's called proof of work. And it just means that, like, it's basically the whole idea behind Bitcoin was that the mining process is supposed to kind of emulate gold mining, right? Like
Right.
at the very beginning, it was really easy to mine Bitcoin. Just like in the 1800s, everybody, you could go out to California and probably strike it rich, man. All you got to do is just dig around in a couple of hills and you've
Yep.
got a bucket of gold. Now, though, 100 years later, it is much harder to mine gold. We're doing like
Zoom.
mining it off of the ocean floor, like
Zoom.
that, right? Because all the low hanging fruit, we've already gotten it. Similarly, when Bitcoin was created, the block reward, so like the reward that miners get when they
Huge.
solve a block every 10 minutes was 50 Bitcoin every 10
No
minutes was
way.
created. 50 Bitcoin. And
Wow.
every 4 years, that number cuts in half. So from like 2009 to, it actually was a little under 4 years the first time. I think it was three. It was like 2009 to 2012. Every 10 minutes, 50 new Bitcoin were created. From 2012 to 2016, 25 were created.
Man.
From 2016 to 2014, actually, I think there might be another one because I'm pretty sure we're at 6.25 now. So there must have been another one that I missed somewhere in there. But basically,
Yeah.
like it sort of mimics that idea of like as the network progresses, as it grows, that it becomes more and more, it requires more and more effort to make less Bitcoin. And so, if you extrapolate that out, I mean, I think so we're at 6.25 now. So within a little over a decade, we'll be under or near like 1 Bitcoin
Yeah.
per 10 minutes that's being created. And I don't think that we've even begun to see like the supply shock that will cause,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because if you look at MicroStrategy and Square alone, between those two companies, every new Bitcoin that's created every day is bought by those companies.
Really?
Yeah. It's like 900 Bitcoin created a day. They're actually buying more than that on most days between those two
Interesting.
companies. And so like, I think that, long term, right? Unless something happens that makes a lot more people want to sell their Bitcoin, um, and the obvious answer of what could make that happen is the price increasing. So I guess we'll see. I personally have some cash out points. I do plan to cash out a little bit over the next year. My wife and I are talking about buying another house. We're looking to start a family. We have a very small house right now. And we want to have a little more room
Sure.
and a little more land. And so like, even that though, the amount of Bitcoin that I plan on cashing out is less than, it's about a quarter of my total holdings. And my plan is to cash that out to buy a Cybertruck and a car, or a
Cybertruck.
Cybertruck and a house. So like,
Nice.
like I'm not cashing it out to like take a vacation or something like
Sure.
that. Like I'm going big, and so
Sure.
like that's what it is to me. And even then, like I said, I'm not going to sell more than a quarter of it because I plan on keeping 3/4 of it for my retirement.
Sure.
And I actually hope to leave my kid a little bit of Bitcoin someday if I can, because I feel like that'll be hopefully setting them up for a good start. So
Absolutely. No, that's huge. I mean, you got me fired up to try this Bitcoin thing out too, and it's
well, I'm definitely happy to answer any questions you have, man. Like I said earlier, I am not an expert. I'm not.
Mhm.
I'm just a nerd, and I happen to be really enamored by Bitcoin just for some personal reasons that we talked about earlier. And I've been, I've done a lot of reading about it, and I've watched a lot of videos. I hesitate to call that stuff research, but like, I have
exposure to it.
ingested a lot of information, we'll say,
Yeah.
about Bitcoin. And I think that at this point I have a good idea of like what kind of advice to give to other people. I'm not I like making money. I want to be really clear about that, right? Like I don't think that there's anybody on earth that if you're like, here, you want $10, that wouldn't be like, oh yeah, sure, but I'm not very money driven, right? Like I've made
Sure.
career decisions before that are like more about my happiness than money. Like
Sure.
I try really hard not to be like a money driven person, but I think like Bitcoin has changed my life just in the sense that I think long term about money now, and I
Yeah.
just don't spend as frivolously. I think about like, what kind of future do I want to have, and how does that happen, right? Like you don't like a good example. I mentioned before we started recording that my wife and I have both effectively doubled our salaries within the last 4 years, and for
Right. I
me,
forgot
part
to
of that
ask
was
about that.
well, so for part of that for me, when we bought this house 4 years ago, I made about 50 grand a year, and I told her at the time, I said, I want to double my salary within 5 years. I want to
Mhm.
double my salary within 5 years. It was 2016. So my goal was by 2021, I want to be making six figures.
Sure.
And my wife asked me at the time, I was a tier 1 support rep for a cybersecurity company, which not to sound egotistical, it was actually a little bit of a step back for me career-wise. I took that step because it was a lateral move pay-wise, but I wanted to work remote. And so I was like the head IT guy for like an ad and marketing firm in Portland. Was my last job before I started working remote. And I went from that to working remotely for this cybersecurity company. But it felt a little bit like a step back in my career. And I had applied for like a tier 3 role in that same team, and I didn't get it. And so she asked me, she's like, well, how are you going to do that? I said, it's like a great
Zoom.
question. I have no idea. Like rob a bank, maybe? I don't know. It's like,
So what happened?
I'm not good looking enough that I can be a
Zoom.
Like I have very limited options here. Okay. What I ended up doing though was, I think the most important thing was that I set that goal. Right. And I had like very little idea of how to accomplish it once I set the goal. But I also feel like that, 5 years that gives me some time to figure it out. Right. So what I did was I kept an eye out for open positions at the company that I was working for. I didn't really want to change jobs. I had only been there when we bought this house, I'd only been at that job for like 6 months. And so I didn't want to move to a new employer. My goal was to establish credibility at that company, which I think I did by doing a good job at my current role that I had, and then use that to springboard to another position. In about 7 months, it was like 7-8 months after we bought the house, after I had set that goal, a position came open on the professional services team at that company as a program manager, basically running cybersecurity awareness campaigns for a set of clients. Like I would go from, in a support role, I don't know if you ever worked in technical support. And to answer your question, by the way, I've never worked in sales. I just love talking to people. I actually have a background. My background is mostly like my IT background. I started at a small computer retail store in Columbus, Ohio. I was split half between retail up front, and then I also did bench work in the back. So like taking shit apart, fixing it. And then I was probably one of the first like 10,000 people to sell stuff on eBay back in the late 1999, 2000. Part of my job there was I would refurb equipment and then photograph it on an old Sony Mavic, a digital camera that used a 3.5-inch floppy disk for the storage. So you could only store 12 pictures on the damn thing. But I would photograph those and put them up on eBay. So anyway, my main background though is after that I kind of got into support. So when you're working on a support team, you're kind of nameless, right? Like you're on a team, you're working out of a queue, tickets come in, and it's pretty much round robin. Whoever's available gets it. There's not a lot of ownership, right? It's very transactional. You're like, here, let me fix it for you, and then cool, have a great day, see ya. And the next time, there's a good chance that you're not even going to get me. You're going to get, somebody else on my team. So I went from that to, I was a information security program manager. It was my title. It sounded super fancy. I had 14 clients assigned to me that I was their guy. I'm like the face of the company. I should have gotten more of a raise than I did. They kind of stiffed me on the salary negotiations. I went from 50 grand to 70 grand, making that move. I'm fairly certain that I was the lowest paid person on that team for a while. Sure. It's like, was I a little burned about that? Yeah, I guess. At the end of the day though, I was still bringing home like over $1,000 more a month after tax. So we'll call it a net positive, right? And so I just busted my ass, man. I did the best job I could. I learned the job as best as I could. I helped out for internal projects as much as I could. And then about a year into that role, I got a $10,000 raise. Went from 70 to 80. Did that for about another 6 months. There was a round of layoffs at that company that I was not included in. I still had a job there, but kind of the writing's on the wall at that point, right? They fired like 20% of their workforce. Is a 400 person company. They fired 75 people, something like that. So huge. The writing's kind of on the wall at that point. I started looking for new jobs. Found a job at my current company making 95. So I went from 80 to 95. So I was like almost there, right? And at that point, let's see, I started at Degreed in February of 2019. So within a little over 3 years at that point, I had almost doubled my salary. So we're a little over the halfway mark. Huge. And I'm more than halfway there. And so I was stoked, man. But I'm like, how do I tried in the negotiations for Degreed, I tried to get them to go up to 100. Just it's like, like 95, man, like $5 grand more a month. Like, come on. And they wouldn't do it. And that's fine. It is what it is. Like I said, was I burned about it? Maybe a little. Go in there, just bust my ass, do my best job. And I actually, I left before I got a raise because I left to go work for CipherTrace, and I got a raise going from CipherTrace from 95 to 120. It was a significant, probably like the biggest raise I've ever gotten in my life, right? And I was stoked. And then 6 weeks later, I got laid off.
Man,
it felt like a real kick in the gut, man. Like you set a goal like that when you're like, I mean, I started at CipherTrace in February of this year, so like, a little over 4 years after I set that, or not even 4 years, because 4 years would have been this November. Now that I think about it, so yeah, like a little over 3 years, right? I actually met and exceeded the goal by 20 grand.
wow.
And then I had it just taken away from me, like so shortly after that. I hadn't even really settled into the job.
Yeah.
I was bummed. I was really bummed, man. I just felt like talk about a kick in the gut. And so I ended up going back to Degreed, and I said, look, I'd like to come back here. I know that you filled my position because I trained my replacement before I left. And so we were able to work something out there where I came back as a trainer for the team that I've been working on. So I helped to train new people. I actually got to continue training my replacement, ironically.
That's hilarious.
About like 2 months after I left.
Yep.
I did so, but they didn't want to bring me back as a full-time employee. I think they were a little gun shy, right? Like I had already left. Because I was a contractor, though, I was actually able to negotiate a higher salary. So I came back in at 105. And so now, so I worked as a contractor for 105 for like 6 months, and then I applied for an opening on an adjacent team to the one I had been working on, and I got that. So now, still at that same rate. So here we are. It's 4 years and 1 month later, and I hit that goal and even exceeded it by a little bit. My wife, she did something similar. She's basically a director, where before she does quality assurance for a food manufacturing company. So she's got like a biology background. She has a lot of like certifications for food safety and that kind of stuff. And so she basically was able to use those certifications and that background to get into a manager role. She had been just a tech before, and so she moved to a new company as a manager. And then like 2 or 3 months in, they actually fired her boss, and now she has her boss's job.
Wow.
So
look at that. What an interesting couple of years for you.
Man, I mean, I feel really fortunate, and it's funny because like I feel like the stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Like we had to work to make those changes. I think part of it, but I don't know that we would have done that if we hadn't set a goal, right? I think having that goal in the back of my mind, like this is my goal. And again, I'm not a super money driven person, but it's like I just wanted to get to a point where I knew that we could live comfortably and be able to save a little bit of money, so that so like my wife grew up in extreme poverty. Like we were like lower middle class, I'll say. Again, it's like I had like LA Gear sneakers, and we lived in an apartment when all of a bunch of kids I went to school with all lived in like mansions. So comparatively I felt very poor growing up. But when I met my wife, man, and she's telling me about like some of the things she went through growing up, they didn't have running water. They had she told me stories about how they would eat rotten food because it was at least something to eat. Yeah. She can't even eat ham now. Like to this day, 20 years later, she can't eat ham because she got forced to eat like spoiled ham as a kid, and it made her sick. And she's like, even the smell of ham, it just makes me want to retch. So like coming from, especially her, right? But like even both of us, the backgrounds that we've come from, where we have had to struggle for things, and we have had to, we've had to go without. I think that it makes us both want to provide a better life for our kid. But going back to what you asked me about earlier, I think it's also really important to understand like the value of things. I think the reason why that's so important to us is because we've been on the other side of it. And I think the danger there too is like, you look at these rich kids where they have everything handed to them, and they're just sort of spoiled. So like for me, I'm looking forward to, I want to pay my kids allowance in Bitcoin, to kind of teach them the idea that like, I don't know. I personally believe that Bitcoin will continue to appreciate in value, right? Like there's only so many of them, and as more money comes in, I mean, that's like the most
supply and demand.
You could not ask for a more basic example of supply and demand, right? Like, and so I guess it's arguable as to whether or not the demand will increase, but I personally think that there are clear indications that it is. And so the idea is that, what is it that they say right now that you need to have like couple million socked away for retirement so that you can just live off the interest kind of thing is what they
Hmm.
recommend. Bitcoin doesn't get interest, right? But it
Grow in value.
can increase in value. And so it's like, I think it'd be cool to be able to give my kids something that, you know, that if they hang on to it would increase in value over time. Hopefully, and make their lives a little easier so that I'm sure that they'll have struggles, right? We all have struggles. My
Yeah.
goal though is to make sure that my kid doesn't have the same kinds of struggles that I had.
Yeah. And I think that's very admirable of you, Dan. You went through hardship in your life that a lot of people can't even imagine, right? And you've used that experience of, like going through these hardships and you want a better life for your children. And it's not just that. You don't want to just give them money. What's that example? Like you can teach someone to fish and give them food for their life, or you can give someone a couple awesome smoked salmons. And smoked salmon, shout out Canada, we love it. But you gotta think long term. And it's not just the money that you're giving them. You're teaching them how to use their money, and whether or not they continue with Bitcoin, which I think I can appreciate that you want them to. They'll at least know how to do it. They'll change their understanding of thinking. And honestly, dare I say it, that can change a life permanently. And I think that's just a fantastic thing that you're doing.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, go ahead.
I was gonna say I'll shout it out, even though by the time this airs, I know you mentioned that this will air in early January. This session will be over by then. But
Yeah.
this Saturday on the 12th, I'm actually hosting my first Bitcoin 101 informational session. It's a 45-minute Zoom call where I basically plan to spend about 25 minutes with a presentation talking about sort of at a high level overview, what is Bitcoin, right? Because I could spend the entire time talking about just that, but really we're just going to talk about a high level overview of like, what is Bitcoin? Why should you care about it, right? Like what's the big deal? How do you get some? And then once you have some, how do you secure it, right? So that you don't lose all your money. So like I mentioned, I've had a lot of people reach out to me about Bitcoin, right? Some close friends, some people that I haven't talked to for a long time. Like I've had a couple of people that are like classmates from high school, and I graduated in 1999. So I mean, there's some of those people that I have barely spoken with for 20 years, and they're reaching out to me. Hey, I see that you're into Bitcoin. I have questions. I had a guy reach out to me the other day. I don't even, it's weird. It's like, I think he sent me a friend request on Facebook, and I added him just because of our mutual friends. And I could tell that we went to high school together, but I didn't even recognize him. He graduated like a year before me. And he said, hey, I wanted to ask you about this because let me find it here. He said like, I'm just going to paraphrase it. He basically just said like, look, I want to start a savings account for my kid. He has a young child. I want to start a savings account for my kid. And my bank savings account only offers a 0.05% interest. And he's like, which by the way, that doesn't even beat inflation. Like it doesn't even come close to beating inflation. I think inflation targets are like 2% a year.
Yeah.
Although I'll be interested to see what the next couple of years will be.
Man, let's not go there.
Right. So like if you put your money into a bank account at 0.05% interest, you're are actually money. Effectively losing money over time.
Yep.
And so like I think as more and more people catch on to that, and I do think even though our Fed here has said, oh, we're not going to do negative interest rates and all that, they're already doing it in Europe, man. I think it's only a matter of time before we're going to get back to the point where keeping your money in the bank actually literally costs you money. Like they're just going to take money out, and then you've got inflation on top of that. And it's like, why would anybody put money in a bank at that point? Oh yeah, it's FDIC insured. That's the answer I hear all the time. Oh, it's FDIC insured. Well, look, that's great. That's awesome. I think the FDIC insurance, I mean, it exists for a reason, right? Like we had a catastrophe in this country where a lot of people lost a lot of money, and they said we need to make sure that never happens again. Great. I think the reality is we have not experienced anything like that since. I question the efficacy of it. I wonder if there were a nationwide bank run, right? Or if there was some kind of nationwide failure of the banking system. How far would that insurance truly go if you have everybody in the country that's trying to claim all of their money at once? I hope we never have to find out.
Yeah, and I mean, let's bring an example to Venezuela. I'm not sure if you're following the financial situation there, but I think
Sure.
I don't know how much people can withdraw, but it's a set amount that they can withdraw either every day or every week. And, it's just such a
Yeah,
sad situation.
you're not allowed to change your money. You're not allowed to take your bolivars and change them to US dollar. It's illegal.
Hmm.
People still do it, right? But it's technically illegal.
Yeah.
And yes, I am very aware of what's happening in Venezuela, thanks to give him a shout out. There's a Reddit user, I believe his name is Working Lime, and he posts pretty often on the Bitcoin subreddit. I would say maybe once a week, or maybe at least once a month. He
Right.
posts updates from Venezuela, and the updates that he posts are I just read one earlier. He basically posts like, this is the exchange rate. It's this many bolivars to one Bitcoin, right? And I've seen that number increase like crazy.
Yeah.
I remember when it hit 1 billion bolivars to one Bitcoin earlier this year, and I
Yeah.
think at this point it's like over 3 billion. I mean, it's like continues to the gap continues to widen. And then
It's
he also
crazy.
posts, like, how much Bitcoin volume has been traded on local Bitcoins in the country for that week. And then he also posts what the minimum wage is in US dollars. The monthly minimum wage right now in Venezuela is like $1.50 US dollars. It's insane to think about, man.
Monthly.
Like, monthly. Now he did say,
Wow.
because I asked him, because somebody else asked in the thread today. It's like, well, so if it's $1 and some change a month, for wages, how much does food cost? Like, how much does a loaf of bread cost? How much does a gallon of milk cost? And he said, well, a loaf of bread is like 75 cents, and a gallon of milk is like $3. And I said, and I replied to that, and I said, I said, well, help me understand. I said, if a loaf of bread costs half, like basically half a month
Yeah.
wages, and a gallon of milk costs 2 months wages, how are people
Zoom.
eating? You know, and he said basically that the government gives people food boxes, which, socialist country, I guess. Like, I guess it's good that they're at least doing that, but it's a shame that they're even in the spot that they're in. And I mean, without getting into a whole like socialism versus communism debate, I
Yeah.
do think that personally, I think there are merits from both. I think that,
Yeah.
any one system that falls strictly into one or the other, I think is going to end up very, very bad for the common person,
I
right?
agree.
I think in a capitalist system, strictly capitalist, you're going to end up with, uh, and we know this from history, right? You're going
Yep.
to end up with
Zoom.
robber barons, because we tried that, and that's pretty much what happened. And in the case of socialist government, we also have plenty of evidence there that, you basically end up with rich government people. So it's like, well, do you want rich business people, or do you want rich government people? Either
Yeah.
way, like, the common person is totally.
Zoom. Yeah.
Um, but I would say maybe especially so right now in Venezuela. I have a lot of empathy for people in that situation, and in fact, I would urge your listeners who maybe also feel similarly empathetic about that scenario to look into, and I don't remember any of the sites. Look up that Reddit user. Go to reddit.com/u/working lime and look through that guy's comment history, because I'm pretty sure that he has posted links to a few freelance sites that
Sure.
specifically are for Venezuelan people. And it's a win-win scenario, right? Because first of all, you can find somebody that's willing to work for, like,
Cheap.
let's be honest, like, poverty wages.
Yep.
Um, I would suggest maybe
Not
paying
even.
a little more than what they ask for, because
Yeah.
I think that whatever they quote you is going to be too low.
Yeah.
But I've heard that they do really good work. I mean, we're talking about the graphic designers, like developers who can write code. And
Yeah.
granted, there might be a translation issue, but there's actually a couple of people that I think that he named by username that are like, this guy does this, and he's got good English skills. Like, there are people out there who are willing to work for their living, right?
Yep.
Like, because that's the thing, is like, I started to look at, like, well, how can I donate money to Venezuela? People like to people in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like many charities, you run into an issue where, a lot of charities are top heavy. The money that you donate
Yep.
to them, you're lucky if, like,
Most of the
out of every
administrators.
dollar, you're lucky if a dime actually makes it to where you want it to go. And so I decided not to go that route. And instead, I've decided that the next time I have any kind of freelance project, which I occasionally have, like, graphic design jobs, and like, hey, design this, I need a website made right now, actually. And I'm going to try
Right.
and find a Venezuelan who's willing to do that. And I'd much rather just pay somebody, I mean, because I feel like that provides, like, a source of dignity for that person too, right?
Definitely.
Like, if you say to that person, like, oh, a handout versus a hand up, to use a cliche, But it's like nobody wants to feel like that they owe somebody a favor,
Yep.
and at least this way there's a way to mutually beneficial. You can get some money into the hands of people who really need it, and you can get jobs done for way cheaper than any freelancer here in the States is going to charge you, just
Absolutely.
from sheer
Absolutely.
economic context. So
Absolutely. And that brings up a interesting psychological theory. I'm going to guess right now because I can't think exactly of the name, but I believe it's called the self-determination theory. And it's essentially, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, are you?
I'm not, no.
So it's
That
essentially
sounds
based on,
interesting though. I'm a fan based on the name.
yeah, so it's based on three pillars: competence, relatedness, and autonomy. And essentially, in any line of work or anything that we're doing, we're trying to get three of these things. And different people have different, nuances
What
that
were
they
those?
like in each.
Competence, relatedness, and autonomy.
Yeah, let me search it
Write
since
that down.
self-determination theory. Determination theory. Did I get it
Interesting.
right?
Yeah,
Sounds like.
I'm a big fan.
Oh, yeah,
No,
sweet.
I'm just
Got it
writing it
right.
down. I'm just making notes.
Yeah. So I got it right. So thumbs up for me. Yeah. So we're always trying to get these things from life. And when you pay someone to do something, they get competence. You could donate it to them, but they wouldn't actually feel good. And that's why I think, have you heard of the Ikigai from Japan?
Mm-mm.
So I don't remember the exact specifics of it, but essentially you need money, you need to have something that you're passionate about, you need to do something that you love, and you need to serve your community. And if you can find all of this, you will live such an amazing life. And that's why,
Filled.
sorry?
Like like inner fulfillment. It sounds like
Exactly.
that would be like the
Exactly.
path to inner peace.
Exactly. And like when you give these individuals who are needing money and who have that competence a way to express that, you're not only just giving them financial stability, which helps them financially, their health and their mental health, but you're also helping them, fulfill themselves. Because one of the interesting things right now is a lot of places in the world, not even only in Venezuela, I believe Zimbabwe has this too, where there's just no jobs. I can't speak to no jobs for Venezuela because I'm not sure of that. You may be able to correct me.
Yeah, and again, I'm not an expert, but it's my understanding that there aren't many opportunities for work, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, because of the economy there, the few opportunities that you can find for work, they don't pay well,
Yeah.
even in the local currency, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I mean, I cannot even begin to imagine, the type of existence that is.
Exactly. And, even in Zimbabwe, there just isn't work, and what people are doing to get that sense of fulfillment, actually, they're doing something different. They're avoiding that feeling. And there's been a huge epidemic. No, I don't know if it's called an epidemic exactly, like scientific wise, but, it's a huge issue right now that a lot of individuals, especially the youth, are going to cough syrup medication to
Mm.
just let go of that and not think about
Yep.
anything, and that's so scary. Other individuals can hire these people that, can save them money because, cheaper country, they can give them fulfillment and they can give them money too. And, you should try to support your own country as much as possible. But I think it's important to think in a broad term as well. I didn't get to pick where I grew up. I was born into this
Right.
world, into a family, and whatever happened, I had some thought into it, but a lot of things happen out of your control. And just by me and you being in North America, Dan, we're so privileged.
Oh, yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and
Even with the hardships that I've been through in my life, Parham, and like I said, I mean, I've seen some shit, man. Like I wish that, I would not wish some of the things that I've been through on my worst enemy.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
like watching somebody that you love die from cancer, losing
Yep.
a parent in the way that I did, and
Yep.
finding them the way that I did.
Yeah.
I don't even know like what kind of person I would be like without that. Because I mean, honestly, like I feel like that, I didn't get a childhood after that. My childhood was essentially stolen from me. And I don't
Yep.
blame my dad. Like, to be clear, like my dad was ill, like
Yep.
he had lifelong struggles with depression. He had tried to
Yep.
kill himself many times. And apparently when I was born, he was older when I was born. I was 55 when I was born, and he had
Mhm.
tried to kill himself like multiple times.
Right.
And I guess after I was born, that almost decade, he didn't try it once. So like it was almost like it gave him like a little more wind in his sails. I think that if I hadn't been born, I have a feeling that my dad would have died long before he did, and so like
Mhm.
anyway, I think like even with all that though, I absolutely agree with what you said. I think that privilege is a little bit of a loaded word, especially in this society. I think a lot of people bristle when they hear that
Yeah.
because they feel like, well, I've been through things. I've
Yep.
struggled.
Yep.
I've had to scrape by. I've had to claw and scratch and
Yep.
sometimes steal and borrow. Like
Yep.
every single one of us have probably done
Zoom.
that. We wish that we,
Didn't have
didn't
to
have
go
to.
through or do.
Yeah. So like, sorry, my headphone just died.
Oh man.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's like you said, I had zero choice in that. I had nothing to do with it. Um, but I have a lot of sympathy for the people that the opposite side of that coin, where like they also like the people that are in Venezuela right now. Most of them probably had very little to do with that. It just happened to be where they were born. Most people, I think, even here in America, a lot of people live and die like within a 20-mile radius of when they were born. So that's a hard thing to break out of, man.
Yeah. And it's just such a tough thing. And to clarify, because thanks for actually bringing this up, everyone has their demons, and I'm not knocking you down or anyone else who's listening to this for going through anything that you are. And I think one way that I'd like to kind of show this is I learned this from a friend actually, and they mentioned that like, yeah, some people have gone through a lot of things. Some people haven't had food for maybe 20 days out of 30 days, but for another person, they may not even have that understanding. And like something that's a minor magnitude for that person may be such a big deal. And I don't think people should feel ashamed for that, right?
Yeah.
Because they just don't have that experience. And it's hard for people to understand without going through life. And you're mentioning that, without the experiences that you've had, you wouldn't be the person that you are today. And I don't know if I can speak to you for this, but I feel the exact same way. And that's kind of why this show is the way that it is. I want to know about people. I want to know about what made you the person that you are. I want people to understand that life isn't easy and it doesn't have to be easy. You should embrace that and, go forward and persevere, because that's how you're going to enjoy your life. That's how you're going to find success. And success isn't just a monetary number, and it can be.
Right.
But
Sure.
I honestly think fulfillment and happiness and contentment at the end of it is what's important, because you bring up a lot of people on their deathbed. You ask them, what did you want to do? Oh, I should have done this. Oh, I should have done that. Oh, I should have taken life easier. Just do what you want to do, what you're passionate about, go forward with it. And Dan, for you, I think one of the passions that you have, if it's fair to say, is Bitcoin and the advocacy for it, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate that.
Actually, can I clarify on that?
Please.
I think that if anything, I am most passionate about financial freedom.
Huge.
But Bitcoin
led you to
is
it.
By far the best vehicle for that I personally have found. Sure. And so maybe a better one will come along. And if that ever happens, I will reevaluate my support of Bitcoin. I might potentially switch to a new team if something better does come along.
Yeah.
To me, the something better, I have a hard time envisioning what that would be.
Yeah.
One thing I want to mention, because I know I don't know how much time you have. I honestly have all day, but I'm sure you don't. Although my wife probably wants some help putting up Christmas lights later. Okay. We didn't even get to some of the things that I wanted to talk about, man, because in my life, because I know that you're big on like personal process, right? And like I guess you could probably call it self-improvement too, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So like some of the things that I've done in my life, man, and I'll get to the process that I used to do all of these things, because really I think if we're talking at a high level, it's the same sort of like loose framework, just applied to different scenarios. So the things that I've been able to change or improve in my life, I used to have just nasty, bloody fingernails, man. Pretty much my whole life as a kid, I had a lot of anxiety. If you can imagine maybe some of the things that I went through, yep. I had a lot of just like nervous energy, and I would like chew on my fingernails and they'd just be like jagged and bleeding and just nasty. And when I was about 24, I decided that like 24, 25, I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore.
Right.
And it took me a few years to get to this point. But what I did, so the first thing I did, right, when we talk about like the framework,
Sure.
The first thing I did was set a goal. I said, I don't want to chew my fingernails anymore. I don't like this about myself. I want to
Yeah.
change it. I've, I feel like that one danger, a rut that a lot of people fall into is, well, this is just how I am. I'm just
Mm,
this way. I'm just this kind of person. I chew my fingernails. That's just how I am. We are what we make ourselves to be. Like, I think
right.
that, it is, there is almost zero argument that like one of human beings like key traits that have allowed us the evolutionary advantage to sort of rise to the position that we are in is our adaptability. And so
Yep.
like none of us are just that way. None of us,
Yep.
that's not just how we are. Like you can change yourself if you want to. And I think a really important part of that is setting a goal as like a first
Hmm.
step. So
Huge.
goal, stop chewing my fingernails. So again, at the very beginning, I'm just like, well, how do I accomplish that goal? And I started trying to think like I'm a problem solver, right? And part of my job with a support background, my career has really been centered around finding, we'll say, like creative solutions or workarounds to problems. And so I applied that same kind of thought process to how do I stop chewing my fingernails? And a couple of things that I identified. So first of all, I chew my fingernails when I'm bored. I chew my
Mm,
fingernails, and I also chew my fingernails when they get too long. And so, what can I do instead? Well, for me, I tend to wear pocket pocket t-shirts. Like if I'm wearing just a t-shirt, it's usually got a pocket. If I'm wearing a graphic tee, I usually have a shirt over it that has a pocket. And if I don't, I've got jeans on that pocket. So what I started doing was I bought a pair of nail clippers, a second pair of nail clippers. So I have my nail clippers at home, and then I always had a pair with me. And for like
Zoom.
years, man, every time that I would catch myself chewing my fingernails, which by the way, especially in the beginning, was very often. And I think that's another, maybe we'll call it a corollary to that first step in the framework, right? So set a goal, and then you need to understand, you set a goal with the understanding that you're going to
Zoom.
fail. Like you are not going
Yep.
to hit that goal immediately. And if you're setting goals and you're hitting them right away, then you need to be setting harder goals for yourself.
Hmm.
Or at least like, or
Yep.
at the very least that those easy goals need to be like a list of multiple easy goals so that you
Yep.
can just ding, 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 write down them. And then when you're
Oh
at the
man.
end, you're like, I've actually accomplished something.
Dan,
So set,
Dan, I gotta stop you here, man. Like,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
just so much things to talk about. Like,
yeah, yeah,
first of all, we're talking about goals. Goal setting is absolutely important, and then you're talking about smaller goals in between. Now, the interesting thing is when you combine these two things, you are way more likely to do something. So, just the fact that you talked about that, that's incredible. The next thing that you talked about, which I really appreciated, Dan, was the fact that you're like, okay, let's break it down. Why do I do this? And that is so important because, in life, when we go through stressful events, especially at first, when we're young, especially, and we don't know how to cope with it, we do something. For some individuals, I think the classic example is you go through a hardship, you open up that jack and you bring it down. And I'm not just
yeah,
using that. It can be any alcoholic beverage or substance.
sure,
And
sure,
that becomes a cue. Your feeling literally becomes a cue. And those two parts of your brain, the emotional side, when you have that feeling and pretty much a memory of going into that, kind of become linked and they become coupled. So you have
yeah,
to avoid it. And there's been certain studies where they showed that, if you used to be a former smoker and you just hang out with the people you used to smoke, you're more likely to do it. So you need to move out of the environment completely. And what you're
we'll get to
mentioning,
that. We'll
Dan,
get to that one in a minute.
oh man, and what you're mentioning, Dan, is like you realize that, hey, when my nails are long, I'm more likely to do it. When I'm feeling a little bit anxious, I'm more likely to do it. So you cut them, you put a nail clipper, you changed your environment. These are huge points, and it's not just applicable to this. It's applicable to life. It's
It's a
applicable to.
framework, right?
It's a framework, yeah. And I just wanted to add that because I wanted to expand on it. That's a really big thing that I do in my own life too. So please go ahead.
Actually, maybe instead of framework, we can call it a personal process.
There you go. Hey, I like that. I like that.
Hey, it's like when they use the title of the movie, like in the movie. um, so yeah,
Oh
and I want to be clear too. I'm not knocking small goals. I think that it's fine to set big goals. It's fine to set a small goal. I do think it's important though that if you're gonna set a small and easily achievable goal, it needs to be part of like multiple steps, right? Because like
hmm.
otherwise, what's the point? Otherwise, you're just patting yourself on the back for just nothing. And
Yeah.
like I think we all already get enough like participation trophies these days as it is. Like we're talking about like changing your life, man, like making your life better, those kinds of goals, if it just happened and if it was just easy for people to do that, everybody would have better lives, right? We'd all be rich and thin and good looking, like, but that's just not how it is. Like,
Yeah.
if it were that easy, everybody would do it. So for me, it's like, yeah, set the goal, know that you're going to fail, find out why you're doing the things. I think understanding why things are happening is an important part to changing them. And so for me, it took me about 2 years, but I successfully quit chewing my fingernails. My fingernails now are, they're not bloody, they're not jagged, they're pretty. I do keep them pretty short, mainly because I play guitar, but also because it's hard to chew on something that's not there. But I gotta say, I do not remember the last time that I caught myself chewing my fingernail. There are some times where I'll chew, like, if I got like a little skin around them or something,
Yeah.
But it completely changed my life. That's $1 billion industry, by the way. Quitting chew your nails. They make like little nail polishes and stuff that you can do. There's like all kinds of people. There are some people that go through like hypnosis so that they can stop chewing their fingernails. It can be done though. I found this out later, but the sort of process approach that I took for this is very similar to I think anyway, I'm not a big expert on this stuff, but it's very similar to like mindfulness in a lot of ways, right?
Meditation.
It's just being aware of like, and don't be mad at yourself, right? Because again, you set the goal knowing that you're gonna fail it at least a few times, and so every time you fail it, instead of saying like, "Oh, you an idiot, you fucked up again," like what a worthless piece of you are, like aren't you just up? You just say, "Yep, all right, I expected this, I knew this was gonna happen." And now I've identified it and we're right back on track, right? And in my case, in the case of the fingernails, it was I'd be mid chewing them and I'd be like, oh, I'm chewing my fingernails. And so I would just stop, grab the clippers and just clip the rest of my nails, file the ones that I had chewed on, and then put them back in my pocket and go about my day.
So that was kind of my first, that was my first adventure of like, man, I really don't like this about myself. This like big thing I don't like about myself and I want to change it. And so a couple of other things that I've been able to apply that to, I took a similar approach to what we were talking about earlier with the bill calendar, right?
Yep.
Man, my credit is well, why is my credit? Well, I'm not very good at remembering to pay my bills. I don't have a good memory. That kind of stuff just isn't on my radar. So what can I do? Well, I'm not a big calendar guy. So at first I actually tried using like a planner. I had a physical planner to write down. I'm terrible at that, man. I can't do it for anything. I can't do it for journaling. I can't do it for I'm just an internet guy. First of all, I can't even write more than like a page of text before my hand cramps up. I can sit and type all day long. You ask me to write, and it's just no. I would much rather type it. So I thought, okay, well, I use Gmail all the time. I'm in Gmail every day. I've had it since like 2004. It's a huge part of my life. I'm in there all the time. I don't use Google Calendar though, but maybe I could. We'll try it. So in addition to, I always have my Gmail tab open, right? In addition to that, I would then always have a Google Calendar tab open as well. And hey, turns out that actually works. And again, like it was a process. At the very beginning, there were plenty of bills that I missed, right?
Yeah.
Fortunately, my credit was already so it's like that. I don't know that it could have been any worse unless I had filed bankruptcy. I think it was about as bad as it could get, without just straight up going bankrupt. And so that made it easier to not beat myself up too much.
Huge. Yeah.
And here we are now, 10 years later, where like I said, my credit score is a little lower than my wife's, but for folks in my age group, I have higher credit score than like 95% of people my age. And it is 100%. Thank you. It is 100% because I used this same process to say, I don't want to have credit anymore.
Exactly.
I want to buy a house someday. There's nobody that's going to give me a damn mortgage right now with a, 580 credit score.
Yeah. And that's kind of, what I was mentioning. Like, this is applicable in every aspect of life, every single aspect, relationships,
You mentioned smoking. I was a pack-a-day smoker for like 14 years, man. I started, I was like, you get like the teenage rebellion or whatever. I had smoked a few cigarettes, like here and there, probably from the ages of like 13 to 19, but I wasn't a serious smoker. Starting at the age of 19, though, I was a pack-a-day smoker for like from like probably about the year 2000 till about 2013. And I tried everything, man. I tried patches. I tried the one success that I had outside of this process. I actually was able to successfully quit smoking using Chantix, which is that's hardcore, man. Like that's a drug that your brain chemistry, like it literally stops nicotine from bonding to your neuroreceptors. So you're
really
physically changing your brain chemistry when you take that drug. That's how much I wanted to quit smoking, and it worked. Wow. It actually worked. Then Katie died, and stress response, right? For me, stress responses are eating, which I'll get to in just a minute, and smoking. At the time, it was smoking. Yeah. And so I had been probably about 3-4 months without a cigarette at that point. Katie died in January, and then bam, I'm right back to pack a day in 2011. So for me, what it was, it was the same kind of thing. Like I would catch myself smoking a cigarette, and I would just be like, well, I've only taken 2 hits off of this cigarette. I'm going to just put it out and throw it away. And man, that sucks. I mean, I wasted a lot of cigarettes, and those aren't cheap. They're more expensive every day. But, it's like there has to be some kind of personal cost, right? Like because again, if it goes back to if it's too easy, what's the point? Exactly. And so the easy answer would have been, well, I'll just finish smoking this one and then just not smoke anymore.
For sure.
That's not realistic because when you finish smoking that one, you're going to smoke another one. But if you put it out after 2 puffs, the next time you go to smoke a cigarette, you're going to think, do I really want to wait? Because first of all, you're going to think about it before you even light it up, right? It's not like the last time where you're like a few puffs in and you're like, smoking a cigarette. Yeah. You're probably going to think about it before you even light that cigarette. And then the conversation becomes, instead of thinking, God damn it, I fucked up, it's, well, do I want to fuck up again?
Yeah. No, that's huge. And Dan, I know you wanted to talk about the food, but we've gone for a decent amount of time, and we still haven't even talked about the presidential candidate aspect of it.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about the food real quick, and then we can talk about the president. Sure. Honestly, the presidency thing, I think quicker than you think. Okay. The food thing, I struggle with my weight my whole life, man. I'm a fat, nerdy kid. I spent my whole life pretty much inside on a computer. Starting at the end of last year, though, I had to start taking blood pressure medication. Wow. I was 300 pounds. I was getting ready for a work meeting with one of my biggest clients. They're like an aerospace company in Seattle. I'm sure you probably could guess. And it was about 20 minutes before the meeting was supposed to start. Monday morning, it's like 8 a.m. Monday morning, 8:10 Monday morning. I have like the worst headache that I have ever had in my life, man. Just throbbing in the back of my head. Yeah. And I have a blood pressure cuff here. Yep. I had kind of high blood pressure. Like it was like borderline. And so my doc said, buy a blood pressure cuff, check your blood pressure every so often, let us know if it gets too high. So I bought the cuff and never used it, of course. And so I at least had it here though. And I thought, I should take my blood pressure. I'm just curious because I could like feel my heartbeat in the back of my head. And I took my blood pressure and I don't remember exactly what the numbers were, but it was like 187 was the first number. Wow. I remember when I looked it up on Google, both numbers fell really squarely into the seek immediate medical attention category. Jeez. And so I canceled my meeting, needless to say. Oh, and I drove myself to the urgent care, which I probably should not have done. I probably should have called an ambulance. Yeah. By the way, when you go into the doctors and give them the blood pressure numbers that I have, they see you very quick. I had actually never seen a doctor that quick. Within 5 minutes, I was in a room with, they did an EKG. And they said, well, the good news is you're not having a heart attack. I said, great. That's awesome. They said the bad news is that you're super fat and you're going to die if you don't, do something. I mean, they were a little nicer than that, but that was like the takeaway. Sure. So, and in January, I honestly, stupidly, I didn't really do anything immediately after. This was like September, October. They gave me blood pressure medication. I was like, sweet, pills, I'll just take those. So I didn't change anything. I kept eating like Zoom. I didn't do any exercise, and I just took those pills twice a day. And around January, I realized that probably wasn't like a sustainable model for long-term life. And so starting in January, I said, okay, I'm going to start eating better. And I started a low-carb diet in January. I was 317 pounds when I started that diet. Long story short, I started the diet in January, and then starting around April, I started actually leaving the house. I've never been a big outdoors guy, but I started taking walks, taking hikes. So on Sundays, I'll try and go on a longer hike. And then during the week, I try and take a shorter walk every day. I walk at least a mile, about at least a mile every day. sometimes
Huge.
more, and I'm eating way better. I
Huge.
still have a lot to lose, man. I'd like to lose probably another 50 pounds from here, but
Yeah.
I weigh 250 pounds now. I've lost almost 70 pounds since January just from making those changes. And it's the longest I've ever stuck with a diet, and it's the most weight I've ever lost on a diet. And so again, I've had plenty of times, because like I said earlier, it's a lifelong thing that I've struggled with, stress eating. And I think it stems from my dad didn't let me eat sweets when I was a kid. And after he died, my mom, it's not that she didn't care, but my mom has also struggled with her weight most of her life.
Yep.
She had to get gastric bypass surgery a few years ago, and she's finally skinny now, but it took her surgery to do it. And so for me, it was like, I just identified that, like, man, sweets are a killer for me. I love sweets. I've totally gone through like a half gallon of ice cream in one sitting, like more than once in my life. It's not healthy, And so again, you set the goal. I want to be healthier, and then identify like what has been my roadblock to hitting that goal before. Why have my previous diets failed? And my previous diets failed because I did not do a good job of allowing myself to cheat. I would just say, well, this is my diet. I'm sticking to it. I'm eating salads all the time, or whatever the diet was, right? Now I give myself 4 cheat meals a month where I can just eat whatever I want, man. I can eat a pizza. I can go eat a hoagie sandwich. I can eat a big bowl of pasta, like 4 bowls of cereal, like whatever I've been craving. I can that you can't normally eat. I can go eat.
Yeah. And, that's kind of one thing that it's huge. But, like, I want to break it down bare bones. You don't need to do something drastic to, change your weight or change your life.
By any means, to be clear. I eat bacon and eggs and steak and chicken and salads too. But like, I don't go hungry.
But like the thing is, like, you do something that you want to do. And I think that's super important. A lot of people can tell you, oh, you need to do X, Y, Z. But if X, Y, Z doesn't work for you, it's not going to work for you, and you are going to fail. That's going to make you feel bad, and, you're not going to go forward. But even daily walks, even, just structuring your day in a way that you see fit, that's how you should go through life. And Jordan Peterson says that too, like, literally talk to yourself like a crazy person. He's like, like, argue with yourself. What would make me feel good today? Like, could I work for 2 hours and then maybe take a 30-minute break and then maybe do 2 more hours? And, he's like you mentioned, even if you don't hit the calendar, even if you hit 10% of the calendar, that's more than you would have hit without making that calendar. So you should be happy about it.
1 mile a week. That is 1 mile more a week than I was walking a year ago. Like, it's such a low bar. Like, you can step over it. You don't have to jump.
Exactly. And it's a compounding effect, because then you increase your confidence, you increase your self-efficacy with it, which is essentially your belief to do more things. You get more inspired about life. Sorry?
I feel amazing. Like, I can do it. I remember the first walk that we took, and this was on flat ground, by the way.
Yeah.
We walked 3 miles. This was in April. And I remember that my legs hurt for like 5 days afterward. They hurt so much for so long that as we were approaching the next weekend, when we were supposed to do it again, I was like, I'm not going to do it. Like, Friday of that week, I'm like, I am not walking on Sunday.
Yeah.
I woke up on Saturday. My legs felt better. I said, okay, let's try it. So anyway, long story short, man, I can do twice that amount now. I can do a 6-mile hike with elevation, and my legs hurt for like a day. The human body is amazing, man. Like, and you talk about personal process. I think, like, for me personally, what has been the most successful is just that tenacity. Like, don't give up. You have that goal. You go into the goal knowing that you're going to fail a few times along the way. It's not going to be an easy process. It took me an entire lifetime to get this fat, so I'm not going to get skinny in like 5 days or 6 months or even a year, or even 2 years. This is probably like a multi-year process, man. I'm hoping to hit my goal weight sometime around like 2022 or 23. Like,
huge.
Because it has to be that way. Otherwise, if I lost 100 pounds in 6 months, I can guarantee that I'm going to gain that all back and then some. And I know that because I've done that kind of shit before.
Yep. It doesn't work long term.
It doesn't.
And, even losing that much weight in a short period of time, it can actually cause your metabolic rate to come down as well. So essentially, even in your sleep, you're losing less energy. So it's like, it's like passive income, right? Like you're gaining you're losing your weight at a fast pace, similar to gaining a lot of money fast, but then your interest rate goes from, I don't know, like let's say 5% to 0.005. So it's like, you're gaining more money, but you're not doing it easily.
Yeah.
And, sustainable actions like that are just huge. So yeah, I think it's just a fantastic thing that you mentioned there. And, just a lot of value just in this one simple conversation. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, was there any other things that you wanted to talk about before we?
No, that's it, man. I know you want to talk about the thing, which I am too excited to talk about. But man, there's so much. Like I really do. I gotta say, I love what you're doing, man. I'm gonna try and listen to some of your other episodes, because I feel like that. I don't think there's a one size fits all approach. I want to be clear, like, even with this framework, right? Like, I think anybody listening to this, that you're like, well, this sounds interesting, but I don't know if it would work for me. I would say just try it. So like, try it with the knowledge that, you may have to tweak things to get it to work for you personally.
Exactly.
And like that I think is the most important thing, is like, just because something worked for me doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for you, but maybe something that rhymes will.
Huge. And on that note, speaking of working for you, let's go into how you worked to get yourself on as a presidential candidate, because I think that's pretty damn cool.
Sure, absolutely. So first, I want to be clear. I ran as a write-in presidential candidate in 2016.
And what does that mean?
So basically, on presidential, well, on a lot of positions, we'll have a write-in slot. So you basically have like your slate of candidates. In order to be a person listed on the ballot, by the way, is actually very difficult in America. Even though it's a national election, right? President is a national post. Every state has its own different rules for their ballots. And so if I had wanted to really run for president and be on the ballot, I would have had to work to get that done in every single state. Every state has different requirements. A lot of them require somewhere between 10 to 20,000 signatures from registered voters. Now, obviously, most presidential candidates aren't going out and getting them themselves. They're just paying people to do that for them. Yeah. I was, to be clear, so I changed my name to run for president. I don't know if I mentioned that part, because you would ask me a kind of funny legal name. So my legal name for most of my life was Charles Daniel Marshall, and I always went by my middle name. My whole life I've gone by Dan. And I used to joke that I was going to change my name to Dr. Danger Marshall. I was going to make my first name Doctor. My reasoning for it is like, there's that actor guy named Judge Reinhold, and he's not a judge, right? He's an actor. So if he can be an actor named Judge, why can't I be an IT guy named Doctor? Mm-hmm. It was just a joke, sorry, hold on. So I kind of just joked about that for probably a good 15 years. I've been joking about that for a long time, of like, oh, haha, I'm going to do this. So my wife and I, this was probably like around the end of 2015, my wife and I were talking about the upcoming presidential election. Mm-hmm. At that point, Trump hadn't actually entered the race. So the conventional wisdom was that it's going to be Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, right? Mm-hmm. Hillary Clinton versus Jeb Bush was sort of what everybody was assuming that the matchup was going to be. And my wife and I were talking about it, and she made some kind of comment about how, like, if those are the two choices, I'd rather vote for no one. And I gotta say, man, I was like, oh, I love that idea. I love it. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, I'm going to change my name to no one, and I'm going to run as a write-in candidate for president. And I'm going to do it because I feel like that, first of all, on a base level, I feel like that and I felt this way 5 years ago, but especially feel this way now, our electoral system in this country is a fucking joke. Like, it is an embarrassment. It is a patchwork of conflicting and confusing laws for each state. We do it in a weird, antiquated way, right? Where, like, we've got this dumb electoral college bull. It's just, it's a complete show from top to bottom.
Right.
If our electoral system and our candidates are such jokes, why not just run with it? Why not run with it? So I was as far as I know, I am the most famous and popular parody satirical presidential candidate that has ever run in this country. And so, the campaign slogans just wrote themselves, man, right? Like, no one deserves your vote. No one will represent you in Washington. No one is looking out for your best interests. So that was it, basically. I ran as president as a joke. I had a website. I had a Facebook page. I made some videos where some of my videos were serious policy proposals. Like, I think I proposed a blockchain-based voting system where it would provide for fully auditable elections, right? Which I think would be pretty helpful right about now, as you have dumb trying to make these sort of spurious legal claims about fraud that very, very little actual evidence for that, right? If we had a blockchain-based voting system, sort of like Bitcoin, where it's pseudonymous, right? Like, you don't actually know who the vote belongs to, but you can see every single vote, and then your private key is what allows you to cast that vote. And so that was a serious policy proposal, right? And then and that's really what I tried to do with my presidential campaign, right? Like that. And I also used it to highlight, my original goal. I actually didn't want to run as a write-in. I wanted to be on the ballot in as many states as I could, As I started to research it, though, man, how am I going to get 10,000 signatures from registered voters in South Carolina?
Yep.
Like, how am I going to do that?
Yep.
So it turns out that, and another important thing that I found out, again, so I said, okay, I'll be a write-in candidate for president. And so then I started looking at the laws about write-in candidacy. There are, I think it's, it's possible laws have changed, right? And it's also been several years since I've looked into this. So I apologize if I get some of these numbers wrong. But from what I recall, there were over a dozen states where even to be considered a write-in candidate, you had to register. And that involved like money, paperwork, sometimes like registered voters. And so that means that it's crazy to me that literally every voter in those states could write in my full legal name and it wouldn't count.
That's wild.
I mean, to me, I cannot personally think of something that's more anti-democratic than that. That's like despot, man. Oh, well, you didn't register with us. So, even though everybody voted for you, that doesn't count. Like, that's like third world country, like authoritarian, man. Not what I would expect from, the land of the free.
Yeah.
It's an eye-opening experience, my friend. I learned a lot, and I'm glad I did it. And my original plan was I actually considered, like, maybe I'll change my name back to what it was originally. Maybe I'll change it to Dr. Danger Marshall, like I had joked about for years. I decided to keep it, though, for a couple of reasons. One, I like the story, right? Like, I like being no one. I like the idea, like, conceptually. I haven't released anything under this moniker yet, but I started a musical project right after I changed my name, and I've written a few songs, but I haven't released any of them yet. I hope to release them all as an album someday, but the musical project is called End of Me.
End of Me.
I like that idea that who I am as a person doesn't matter as much as my ideas matter, and like the sort of things that I want to leave behind. I don't really care if anybody knows my name once I'm dead, but if my outlook on the world or my impact on the world can live beyond me, that's what I want. Like, that's what I'm interested in, is like legacy. And it doesn't need to be attributed to me. I just want to know when I die, when I'm laying on my deathbed, you talk about, I wish I had like taken it easy and stuff like that. For me, my deathbed, the thing I'm going to be worried about is I want to know that I left a lasting positive impact on the world, even if it's just infinitesimally minor, right? Because we're all like, I'm an insignificant person, man. I'm not ever going to be like famous. I'm probably not ever going to be even rich. Like, I'll be lucky if I get like upper middle class from my Bitcoin investments, right? So like, nobody's going to be talking about my name 100 years from now. But if I can get somebody into Bitcoin, or like inspire somebody to like improve their life in some other way, and that has like a cascade or like a trickle down effect on other people and other aspects of society, man, I will consider my life well lived.
Absolutely. And Dan, kind of just to talk about some of the metrics that you had with your engagement when you ran, because this is an interesting campaign.
Mhm.
Like how did that look like?
Yeah, let me tell you. So I still have the Facebook page up. If you
Yeah.
look up, full title of the page is "No One for President -No One 2016." And I will say I didn't do a whole lot to market this. I like didn't really push the Facebook page or the YouTube channel or anything like that. Let's see, where does it show? Yeah, about 700 likes on Facebook,
Yeah.
and like which was a little higher. I want to say at one point it was like twice that, but I'm sure as the years progress, I'm sure people would delete their accounts or unlike the
For
page
sure.
or whatever. So yeah, and then I'm trying to think like I posted some things on Reddit. I got like my announcement video here. Got some shares. I got about 8,000 views on that on my like announcement video. My whole thing, like I put out several videos. I had a 60-second speech series where I like put out several videos that the goal was to have right around 60 seconds to like put forward my policy proposal. The idea being is that nobody wants to sit and watch a long video or read like a 15-page document, especially for a parody campaign. But hey, you take 60 seconds and
Yeah. No, fair enough. That's an interesting feat on its own. I don't think too many people would even not even want to. It's like would have the tenacity to even go through with that process to put their name on the ballot and do all that.
Oh man, I had and you got to remind me if we ever end up meeting up for lunch or something up once the border opens back up. Remind me, and I'll bring you a campaign.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that is awesome. Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, so I think Dan, with that being said, just before we go into the shout outs, what is your one message for our audience?
I think within the context of this discussion, as far as personal process, the one takeaway is just don't give up. Don't stop. Don't let yourself be the stumbling block that stops you from reaching your goal, because that, in my experience, that is usually what it is, at least for me. And so just don't give up. I think a key part of that, like I talked about earlier, a key part of that is just knowing going in that you're going to fail. And for me, that's been huge. Like I'm an expectation kind of person. I'll admit it, I don't like when things don't go the way that I expect them to, right? And so as a result of that, though, I've just built in the expectation that like it's not always going to go my way. And then when it doesn't, which is pretty often, just like, well, I expected this. I planned for this. I knew this was going to happen. And it makes it so much easier, man, to just like those mountains become speed bumps. That's all they are. It's like a Bitcoin chart, man. We call it zoom out in Bitcoin. If you have a chance, go to coinmarketcap.com, click on the Bitcoin thing in the number one entry there, and then scroll down to the chart, and you can actually like play with the dates and enter in like custom dates. Put in a date from like January 2013 to like December 2016. Do it like before that big spike, right? And then look at all those like huge, they look like mountains, man. And then go back and look at the full chart from like the beginning to today's date and realize that massive spike in 2017 made those previous massive spikes look like
nothing.
There are some that look like literally just a straight line, that it doesn't even look like any kind of bump. And that's the same kind of thing that's going to happen when you're trying to reach those goals. It's like when you get to your goal and you look back on that path, those things that you thought that were gonna just completely break you before, they some of them might not even be visible at that point.
Yeah.
Don't give up.
Huge. That's a wonderful piece of advice, and I love the analogy to Bitcoin, and I love that mission because it's true. It makes a big difference, and small steps that lead to changes that you think are massive today are going to be minuscule compared to the improvements and the compound improvements that happen in the future. With that said, Dan, let's get some of your shout outs. Let's get some of your links. And after that, we will go on to our outro.
As far as links, I'll keep it real simple, man. I'm at No One Danger, NOONEDANGER on Twitter. That's also my Facebook. Just type in Facebook/that. And my Instagram. I have a website that has nothing there right now, but should by the time people are listening to this, it's iamdanger.us. There'll be some other links there. Other than that, yeah, that's pretty much it. Me online, I use the same name for a lot of stuff to make it easy for people to find me.
Awesome. Well, we'll throw all those in the description. So for all our viewers and listeners, you can check it out there. And, today's episode, we went through a lot of life, really. We talked about Bitcoin. We talked about, to a certain degree, power and how Bitcoin has an ability in the future to really distribute that power equally among individuals and to protect anonymity without getting your assets taken over by the government. And that's a pretty strong statement, but it can happen. And I'd like to assume that it happens usually for the right reasons, such as for, people who are breaking the law and hurting other people. But maybe there are mistakes made, and maybe there are some unfortunate cases where that happens sometimes for individuals. And I don't think that's ultimately fair. But, we talked about how to change our lives really by taking small actions that are repeatable, that are unique to you, to trust your personal process. And, that's ultimately what this channel is about. Trust your process. There's going to be ups and downs, but ultimately at the end of it, you're going to look at your graph, like Dan was mentioning, and you're going to see a huge jump in the recent years. And then your minute jumps when you first started, the ups and downs are going to seem small. And that's what I want you guys to take away. That's what I think Dan really appreciates too. And, with that being said, thank you for visiting another episode of the Personal Process Podcast. Hey everyone, I'm back after another amazing episode with another amazing guest. We hope we added value into your life so you could take the tips from this episode and fuel your process forward. If you enjoyed our episode today and think other friends or family members may also appreciate the lessons that our podcast brings, be sure to share us with them. Subscribe and rate our show so we know how we did. And always remember, trust the process.